The protagonist found herself in an awkward situation as two children approached her, staring at the maid's food with intense curiosity, clearly eager for a taste. The sudden appearance of two hungry children clearly caught the lady off guard. She had no idea what was happening, as she was certain she had just been working at a supermarket, stacking ramen. A massive discount had sparked chaos, with a crowd of elderly people bickering and fighting over the items, the struggle escalating until they dropped the unpurchased goods all over the floor. As she picked up the items, the protagonist let out a heavy sigh, exhausted by the mess and desperate to quit her job. But when her vision suddenly went black, she assumed it was her low blood pressure acting up. A second later, brilliant sunlight shone on her hand, which was holding the ramen. The girl snapped back to her senses. The darkness and the suffocating feeling of weakness had vanished. She immediately looked around, finding herself in a strange, run-down, and desolate place. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a girl she didn't recognize, a person she had never seen before. Judging by the clothing, she guessed the woman was from the medieval era, yet the reflection in the mirror was just like her, holding the same pack of ramen. She figured it was just a strange dream brought on by lack of sleep. But to her shock, she felt hungry even in the dream, so she decided to eat first and then find kitchen. And that's how she found herself in the predicament of being begged for food by the children. Despite it being a dream, she felt sorry for the children and offered them the ramen. One brother eagerly grabbed it, but the other hesitated, having been beaten badly not long before. Unsure of what was going on, she explained that the food wasn't poisoned and was perfectly safe to eat. To prove her point, the protagonist took a full fork of ramen and showed them. After twirling the noodles onto her fork, the lady popped it into her mouth and chewed with relish. The sight and aroma made the children's stomachs rumble even louder. "It's super delicious," she insisted, urging them to have just one bite. One brother took the chance. Though it was spicy, the flavor was so intense that tears welled up in the child's eyes. Not wanting to leave anyone out, she noticed the second child was still suspicious and called him over to join them. The maid kept coaxing him, saying it was all right, before taking another forkful of noodles. The grimy child tried to hold back, but saliva trickled down his chin. Unable to resist any longer, he finally took a bite, making the maid grin from ear to ear. After tasting it, the second boy also savored the delicious flavor, while the first immediately demanded another serving. The protagonist saved none for herself, giving the very last of it to the mysterious twins. Full and satisfied, both children collapsed onto the floor, laughing wildly, feeling better than they ever had before. Noticing how cute they were, the girl warned them that their food wouldn't digest properly if they kept lying there. The children were confused. One brother blurted out that the lady herself had just said the floor was fine for them. When the boy called out the maid's name, her brain went into overdrive as too much information flooded in at once. Every new question about Aylin's strange behavior forced more memories into the maid's mind. Overwhelmed by the sudden flood of memories, the maid froze, unable to utter a single word. It was a novel titled A Prayer for Healing, where the protagonist awakens as a saintess. The saintess healed everyone she encountered, no questions asked. The body she had entered belonged to Aylin Harlan, the nanny to the princes who were born from a concubine who was herself a maid. This woman was the mastermind who adopted abandoned children and twisted them into villains. The more lively and trusting prince was Louis Richard, and the other, quiet and perceptive, was Evan Richard. The novel was set in an empire where the first emperor, Richard, had partnered with a dragon, bestowing special powers upon his descendants. Through their bloodline, they possessed superhuman strength, magic that broke the limits of humanity, and even powers like foresight or energy strong enough to rip a roof off. In the original story, the twins unlocked their magic at the age of 8, killing Aylin and escaping the first chance they got. The protagonist decided to check the children's ages to figure out how much time she had left. To her dismay, Evan chided her because Aylin had forgotten they were 7, leaving her utterly dejected. The maid was heartbroken, even reincarnated. She wasn't the protagonist and couldn't have a romance with a handsome man. The lady knew that in the original story, the novel's main character dated a group of handsome men, while she was just a common maid. Knowing she was fated to die at the children's hands, the maid began to take extra special care of them. As Aylin tried to remember why the place seemed so desolate, Lewis asked why the maid was being so nice to them today. The protagonist was taken aback by his words, as she hadn't done anything particularly special. The girl smiled, took one of the brothers' hands, and announced that from now on, she would always be good to them. Lewis was surprised by her words and wished for the next day to come quickly. But Evan didn't speak to her, and before the protagonist left the princes after wishing them good night, he showed his annoyance and distrust of Eileen's words. Seeing the silent expressions on their faces, the protagonist's heart clenched. She knew she did not want to die. After falling asleep, she was once again enveloped by a mysterious force that transported the maid to a new location. Eileen scanned her surroundings and, realizing she was in a supermarket, thought she had gone back. The lady found a mirror and saw she was still in the body of the female protagonist from a novel. The girl didn't know where she was, but a sudden squeak drew her attention. It was a strange, small, white, fluffy, round creature that scurried away, seemingly wanting to show the lady something. The protagonist stumbled, shouting wait, as she couldn't keep up. She noticed the creature dash toward a counter and dive into a box. She picked up the box, squinting as she wondered, is it a kitten or a puppy? There was no answer. She glanced around and discovered something else in the box. Oddly, besides the creature, there was a can of chocolate. The lady thought to herself that the children would surely go wild for this. And just like that, she was back in the world of the novel, wide awake. She looked around and realized she was in the prince's room. But where were the children? As she gathered her thoughts, the object in her hand caught her attention. She blinked. A can of cocoa powder? What the heck? Aileen examined it, completely baffled as to how it had gotten into her hands. Taking a taste, she realized it was the very same real chocolate she had obtained in her dream. In the supermarket, she had savored every bite, wondering if this could be real. After some thought, the protagonist concluded that the supermarket might be a transmigration point where she could find clues in her sleep. But her train of thought was broken by a sudden cry from the kitchen. The maids were tormenting the children, and Lewis was trying to get some bread. The angry maids taunted the children, asking, since you're so hungry, why don't you have a taste of this bread? Evan tried to stop Lewis, but he wasn't about to give up. He was starving. As they continued to torment the children, one maid hinted that because one of them wasn't responding, the maids were refusing to give them bread. The girl reached out to pull Lewis, but his brother slapped her hand away. Evan was furious that his beloved brother was being bullied. This enraged the two women, who glared contemptuously at the twins. One maid lost her composure, screamed at Evan, and raised her hand to strike the boy. The child shielded his kind brother, preparing for the impact. But a can of cocoa powder suddenly flew at the woman attempting to strike the prince. Both women were stunned, wondering who would dare to do such a thing to them. But Aileen strode forward with a fierce gaze, proudly declaring that it was her. When the maids saw it was their friend, they let out a sigh of relief, having feared it was someone on inspection. The ladies claimed they were just playing with the princes, but the girl didn't buy it and asked the children. However, Evan said he remembered Aileen saying she would never believe them. Realizing what had happened, the protagonist was consumed with fury and slapped both maids. She then announced that they were fired, leaving the ladies in a state of shock and confusion. Aileen reminded them that no matter how forgotten these children were, they were still royalty, and insulting a member of the royal family was an act of treason. So if they didn't want to lose their heads, she ordered them to leave. The children were surprised, but Evan remained suspicious of the situation. Aileen knelt before the princes to apologize for her subordinates, who had been disrespectful to them. The girl knew the children needed a protector, because if she were to leave the palace, this would certainly happen again. Therefore, the protagonist resolved to change the prince's perception of her as their nanny. So, if she raised them as a protector to be good people, they would never have a chance to become villains. That way, Aileen wouldn't die at the children's hands. She begged for just one chance to be forgiven. After all, the protagonist could then relax, meet a handsome man, eat well, and live happily ever after. Meanwhile, at Reuben's palace, a meal was being held in a dark pavilion. The butler watched his master faithfully, ready to carry out any command. The butler asked his master if the day's meal was to his liking. But after just one bite, he put down his fork and demanded to be brought a looby. The servant wanted to protest, but dared not defy his master's will, so he left to carry out the order. The butler couldn't understand why his master found such a high-quality steak unappealing, but his master was convinced that the taste of a lubi was unparalleled in this world. The next day, the king suddenly decided to go somewhere without consulting anyone. His attendant, worried for his highness, suggested following him regardless. But the master announced he would go alone. He could manage the trip to the tower by himself. Now let's return to the prince's estate, where Aileen lived. It had been a full month since the protagonist came to this world. Now she was doing her best to adapt to life as a nanny. Eileen's daily routine was to wake up early to prepare breakfast for the children, then spend time watching the princes play. She would clean the palace during lunchtime. The protagonist would prepare the meal, grab a few quick bites, and then continue cleaning. After dinner, she would put the children to bed and tell them a bedtime story. She realized that butlers were truly some very remarkable creatures. Eileen's room was magnificent, with wealth that surpassed even the prince's quarters. The room contained a chest filled with countless jewels and trinkets. Every time the protagonist walked past it, she became more certain that the previous owner was a complete jerk. The nanny only went there to get cleaning essentials, not jewelry. It was a box of basic supplies for someone obsessed with cleaning. Aileen didn't even understand how it all happened, how everything had led to this. Every day, the protagonist woke up in the middle of a large, empty supermarket. By now, she had gotten along well with a furball named Hyungi. She also learned that she could only take what she could carry in her hands, nothing larger. As the protagonist picked up a spray bottle to go clean the windows, a girl suddenly spoke up from behind her. A cheerful maid came to report that she had finished cleaning the windows in the East Wing. Her name was Emma, a newcomer to the cold palace who was always amazed by the nanny's tools. The protagonist noticed that the palace's human resources assistant, who was pale at first, was now much healthier. Together, they cleaned the castle until it sparkled. As the two girls were chatting about cleaning products, one of the princes ran over. Aileen asked Louise if he was having fun, and he smiled enthusiastically. The prince laughed and announced, "With my tree climbing skills, I'll be able to pick some apples for the nanny in no time." The lady admired the prince's striking hair, a hallmark of the royal family. Evan also ran over, wanted to show off in front of Aileen, but got a little upset at not being noticed right away. Seeing him, Aileen playfully asked, "How long have you been standing there? Do you want something?" But the prince just turned and ran off. The nanny, meanwhile, was contemplating switching from scrambled eggs to fried eggs. Emma blurted out, "Gosh, it's a bit hard to talk to Prince Evan, isn't it?" But the lady knew he was a sweetheart, just shy, and recalled that in the novel, everything was fine before the children moved in with the protagonist. Because in the novel, the real plot twist began when Kashar appeared. He was the former crown prince, deposed for going mad. The protagonist saved the crown prince by curing his madness, which was a side effect of mixed medications. The twins and Kasha joined forces and then devised a plan to take Elsie from the temple. They vowed to do everything in their power to take her away. That conflict became the main drama of the story, and now all of that might change. While cooking, the protagonist realized that adding a male lead would make things messy. She had intended to make a stew, but ended up deciding on a new soup recipe. She was excited to cook the soup in the beautiful casserole pot she got from the supermarket. But when she suddenly sensed a stranger behind her, she immediately smashed the pot over their head. Aileen guessed it was a thief who had slipped in through the back door. The lady hadn't expected anyone to be here. She had woken up early specifically to eat. But this thief was emitting a strange glow. Looking at the man she had just knocked out, the maid was stunned. Lying before her was a man with blonde hair and delicate features. Struck by his appearance, the maid's astonishment knew no bounds. She had never seen such a sight. After calming down, she realized that someone with such looks couldn't be a stranger. After a moment of thought, Aelin recalled that in the Richard Empire, no one had blonde hair except for the royal family. There was only one arrogant hero in the book with blonde hair and red eyes, full of himself. Duke Casher. After checking his eye color, the protagonist was terrified. She couldn't believe it. She panicked because, in the original story, Kashar suffered from mania and would randomly kill people and destroy things. The Emperor, unaware that it was a curse, had the Duke exiled to the battlefield. To control his madness, he ate a poisonous fruit called a lubi. The lady felt ashamed. She had hit a patient suffering from a headache with a casserole pot. But the question of why he was here remained. Seeing no signs of improvement in Kashru, The protagonist thought he was dying. Now, the girl was terrified that what she had done would not be forgiven. She threw the body into a supermarket cart and hastily tried to dispose of it. Aileen rushed to act before Kusher woke up and the sun fully rose. While dragging the body up a hill, the lady realized the Duke would see this as an attack on him. The weight of the body and the relentless sunrise made her even more nervous. Climbing the slope, the protagonist discovered a tall, ornate spire. It was the tower bearing the royal crest. Kusher's mother was locked inside. The emperor had imprisoned his wife for giving birth to a mad son. Kusher visited her every year. Realizing they were close to the tower, Aelin understood why the Duke had suddenly appeared. But just as the lady was distracted, the man suddenly woke up and tackled her to the ground. Kusher pinned her down, glaring at her with rage. He needed to know who she was. The nanny tried to say something, but fear left her speechless. Desperate for an answer, the maid asked if he remembered anything. Aileen explained that she wasn't trying to throw him out, but thought a thief had broken in. He couldn't understand the girl's ramblings, but he lifted her chin and ordered her to open her eyes. Terrified, the protagonist burst into tears, begging for anyone to save her. Kusher stared at the girl and finally figured out what had happened. He was annoyed that this woman had hit a thief and was trying to dispose of the body. The Duke grabbed his head, muttering that there were many ways to destroy evidence. But the moment Aileen felt his grip loosen, she bolted. With fury burning in his eyes, Kusher roared that he would kill her. But instead of running, Aileen fell to her knees, pleading for him to spare her. She had to save the princess. Hearing her words, the Duke realized the girl before him was just a servant. His suspicions were confirmed. Ms. Kashar didn't want to run away or relive this nightmare. She felt the royal family's feuds had caused enough chaos, so it wouldn't be so bad to survive. But the Duke just sneered and decided to pay a visit to her masters. He ordered her to lead the way, but the way he said it, Sir Kashar drew his sword. The protagonist was scared out of her wits, but out of desperation, she led the Duke to the princes. Upon entering the castle, the Duke asked his girl what she had hit him with. Flustered and embarrassed, Aileen shyly pointed to the casserole pot. He was unsettled, while the lady panicked about what to do next. She even wondered if perhaps the Duke was here to kill Evan and Lewis. Just as the lady was plotting how to hit Kashar with the casserole pot again to erase his memory, the room's door opened. The princes, having just woken up, walked in, curious to know what was happening. Lewis wanted to know who this stranger standing before them was. Without much thought, the child guessed the man must be Eileen's boyfriend. But not wanting to let go of the nanny he had grown fond of, he threatened the stranger, refusing to let her go. The other boy even thought the man might be a bad guy trying to kill them. Lewis saw the broken casserole pot and grabbed a large shard in his hand. The protagonist worried the child would cut himself, while the prince intended to stop the bad guy. With every second the situation escalated, Eileen's nerves frayed even more. Even in the face of a drawn blade, Lewis's courage remained firm. Aileen knew well that if Kashar wanted to, he could kill anyone without a trace. Fearing for the twins, the protagonist decided to take a risk, not knowing what the outcome would be. She grabbed the Duke's hand and declared herself his girlfriend. The terrified nanny gripped his hand tighter, pleading with Kashar to play along. Lewis, unconvinced, asked the man again if it was true, while Evan quietly tried to reach for the sharp object. She apologized for her boyfriend's visit. The lady tried to escort the Duke out of the house at once, but after being threatened, she offered to let him in instead. The protagonist had all three of them sit down in the dining room and then hurried to make breakfast. They sat at the table, all eyes on her, waiting for her to serve the meal. Watching them sit at the same table, the protagonist felt like she was in a sitcom. She ordered Emma to set the table, and the nanny hastily prepared everything. The lady approached her ward, telling her not to leave the Duke and the princes alone. Kusher retorted that he heard every word and wanted his breakfast soon too. Aileen stood there pounding a fish, wishing he had amnesia. After a moment, she realized why couples always argue while pounding fish. While waiting in the dining room, an uneasy tension filled the air as everyone sat in nervous silence. Lewis, eager for breakfast, noticed something was off with his nanny's sweetheart. Out of curiosity, the prince asked what was wrong with Kashar's head. The duke smiled and explained that someone had tried to knock him out and dispose of the body. Louis, shocked, guessed that Alan had hit him. The duke clenched his fist and agreed with the little prince with a sneer. But before he could finish, the protagonist emerged from behind with the food, asking when that had happened. The nanny said the lump hadn't gone down because Kashar hadn't eaten breakfast, the best medicine. The protagonist served a variety of exotic dishes and wished everyone a good appetite. Louis devoured the new dishes, while Evan thanked her for the food. The duke was stunned. He had never seen or heard of such a thing. Aylin said the dishes were from her hometown and urged them to eat while it was hot. The protagonist remembered a scene in the story where Kashar ate seafood, so she guessed he would like the fish. After the first bite, the duke's eyes widened in surprise. The protagonist was on pins and needles, unsure if he would like the meal. Hearing the not bad verdict, the nanny immediately perked up, wanting to know exactly how not bad it was. Kasha said it was good enough to cure a headache, so the lady began to feed him with a spoon. After eating, the man stared at the maid, looking thoughtful for a moment. Then he whispered, asking how long they had known each other. The lady, feeling anxious, played along, guessing it had been 3 years. Kasha smiled and suggested the maid take their relationship to the next level. The protagonist, completely caught off guard, thought the duke had gone mad. Everyone in the hall froze, waiting for Eileen's answer. The duke stood up, noticing that the conversation was as shocking as a sudden, heavy punch. The lady breathed a sigh of relief, thinking Kasha was about to leave, but the man knelt on one knee, kissed her hand, and said that Eileen's breakfast was amazing. So he wanted to thank her and asked her to wait a moment. Kasha held the lady's hand, declaring that it would be no fun if she ran away. That night, the duke jumped into his carriage, ready to execute his brand new plan. Mikhail Evans was in the carriage with him, ever loyal to his master. Watching this yet another eccentric act, the subordinate thought the duke had finally gone mad. But on second thought, he felt it was not that unusual. Kasha had always been impulsive. A long time ago, a medium-sized country called Vladis began to form alliances and grew stronger over time, turning hostile towards the Richard family. Eventually, war broke out. At first, it was just a small conflict, and they sent Kasha to the battlefield to die, as he was just an abandoned prince, but Vladis was left in ruins. At the age of 15, the duke unlocked the power of his royal family in the middle of the battlefield, but the scientists who studied these abilities concluded that such power could not possibly exist. He ended the war after 3 battles. Thereafter, people gathered under Richard's banner, and for this, they bestowed upon Kasha the title of Lads. Mikhail couldn't understand what had happened on the anniversary of the Empress's death. Kasha grinned, and, at least to arouse some curiosity, he mentioned meeting an interesting girl on the road. The Duke couldn't stop thinking about those events. On that busy day, as he approached the prince's castle, he smelled a familiar sweet and savory scent, an aroma he hadn't smelled in a long time. He couldn't imagine a woman having the audacity to knock him out and then toss him aside like someone who wasn't injured in battle. The girl was simply a lunatic. At first, he wanted to kill her on the spot the moment he heard the word sweetheart. The unprecedentedly pleasant smell didn't help either. But the dish made the Duke dizzy. It was spicy, savory, and unbelievably delicious, and it also eased his pain. For this, Kasha was prepared to forgive everything and remembered that it was made with dried fish. He wondered if something else could replace the poison, if he could regain his sense of taste. After pondering, Kasha reconfirmed whether the royal family members really lived near the tower. He requested information on the nanny, as he owed her a favor and wanted to repay her. Some time had passed since Eileen met Kasha. He sent many different people with a large number of gifts for her. The lady, flustered by all this wealth, decided to find out who the sender was. The heroine didn't know what was happening or why the Duke was sending her so many gifts. The girl thought Kasha would leave and forget her, but the next day, the cold palace was filled with presents. She also met Mikhail, who kindly handed her a letter. To make a long story short, the letter said that if the lady did not accept the gifts, she would be killed. The nanny knew that if they asked for the gifts back, she would have to return all of them. The twins were the happiest because of all the gifts and the new people. Eileen immediately started to feel stressed for the children's sake, but the man approached cheerfully. He was Viscount Chopin Howard, and he had brought gifts for the princes. It was an assortment of toys with a huge castle in the center. As the lady was worried, she had to keep everything safe for a future return, and she insisted that no one touch anything. Louis was stunned that the nanny wouldn't let him play with his gifts. The child burst into tears, wanting to play with the toys so badly that he even boasted about how he had always been a perfect little angel. Then, the prince used his secret weapon, his sparkling eyes. She couldn't refuse and let him play, but warned him not to break anything and promised to give him a better toy tomorrow. Watching Louis's cuteness and joy, the maid blurted out how much the toy cost. When the nanny saw the price tag, she quickly calculated that the amount could cover her rent for 2 months, and her face turned pale. But with the money Eileen had secretly stashed away earlier, she still managed to buy the toy. Our heroine planned to return all the gifts to the Duke and asked Emma for help in organizing them. Even as the assistant carried the gifts inside, the lady couldn't stop feeling stressed about them. Evan tugged on the nanny's skirt, demanding her attention. This was the first time in a long while that the prince had spoken to the heroine. She wondered what he wanted from her, but the child only asked about the Duke. The girl was surprised that the child had guessed the visiting man was the Duke. The prince added that he had heard it from another servant and the person who delivered the gifts. Besides, the only person in the royal family with red eyes was Kasha. Eileen promised that the Duke wouldn't lay a finger on them, but Evan clarified that he wasn't talking about that. The child said she looked a bit off, which made the lady realize that someone was worried about her. At that moment, Evan crossed his arms, his face flushing red, looking extremely cute. The nanny couldn't hold back any longer and lunged forward to hug the child, nuzzling their cheeks. The lady declared that she was truly happy someone cared about her. Evan pointed out that they didn't look like they were on a date, and the lady wanted to confirm that they indeed were not. But from behind, the Duke's voice suddenly cut in, repeating Eileen's words, and then adding with surprise that the lady was afraid of her lover. The heroine wondered what he was doing here, but the Duke immediately invited her out in a cold tone. The man before her was both terrifying and handsome, leaving the lady with mixed feelings. But Kasha ignored the lady's reaction and asked why she no longer called him sweetheart. This behavior frightened the heroine even more, and in her panic, young Evan offered to talk. But the Duke sent him away, telling him not to interfere as this was a conversation for adults. After promising to be back soon, the lady and the man headed to the kitchen. The Duke asked the lady why she wasn't wearing any of the gifts, but she said they weren't for her. But Kasha explained that the gifts were just a reward for the breakfast, yet Eileen only begged to have her life spared. He clarified that the reward for the breakfast was one thing, but compensation for the incident was another. To brush it off, the nanny declared that she hadn't received anything anyway. But the Duke just smiled and asked if that was true. He said he saw one of the princes surrounded by toys. Realizing how badly she had messed up, the lady fell to her knees, regretting not having hidden everything. To calm her down, Kasha said he wouldn't ask for compensation, only asking if they had prepared anything for him today. When the man said that cooking might save her, the nanny perked up, declaring she would prepare an 18-course meal. The Duke stroked her hair and said he liked Eileen's cooking, but could offer her something else. He made the heroine raise her gaze to meet his crimson eyes and declared that the girl had piqued his interest, so he wanted to start their relationship with a date. Eileen was a little annoyed because the man was telling lies so thrillingly in front of her. After a while, Kasha and the heroine went on a date. As she strolled down the street, she marveled at all the shops and wealthy people around. But as the lady was lost in thought, she wasn't watching her step and started to fall until the Duke caught her. The maid was extremely embarrassed, and the impact against the handsome man's chest made her legs go weak. Kasha offered to hold her hand, saying it was dangerous here, but the lady worried that people would stare too much. The man took her hand and said, "Relax, everything is fine, no need to blush." The moment they started walking together, the harsh gossip of the nobles followed. The words spread like wildfire, and rumors of Ladis having a girlfriend echoed from every corner. The heroine felt terrible. Some women even glared at her for snatching such a hot bachelor. To escape the stares, the nanny said her throat was particularly dry. So they hurried to the Golden Eden bar, where a young man greeted them. Eileen immediately requested the most private spot, preferably with curtains to shield them from prying eyes. Although the waiter was embarrassed, he decided to help and led them to a suitable table. As she looked around the cafe, the heroine noticed it looked just like a romantic cafe. The lady realized that once in a place like this, they had better order something. When the Duke ordered all the popular items, the lady was outraged by the local prices. After taking the order, the waiter hurried away, leaving an awkward silence between them. She couldn't tell if she was dizzy from fear of death or from his handsome appearance. But either way, it felt super awkward. Noticing her restlessness, the Duke told her to calm down, it wouldn't bite. His words eased the maid's tension, but Kasha clarified that it hadn't bitten yet. He reiterated that Eileen had piqued his interest, which was why he sent gifts and asked her out. She guessed he might be interested in her because of her humble origins. Their conversation was interrupted by the kitchen sending out all the ordered dishes. The lady was amazed by the selection of desserts, only to become sad when the waiter brought water. The Duke offered her his dish, but she immediately refused. She didn't have that much money. He laughed and declared, "Don't be ridiculous. Eat." He was paying. His words made her both touched and flustered, and her heart beat a little faster. Giving up her stubbornness, the lady finally tried the dessert. The tempting presentation gave her high hopes for the delicious-looking sweets. But the first bite made her realize something was wrong with the food. It was sweet, and they had certainly used expensive ingredients, but something was missing from the flavor. The lady realized these fancy desserts were not as good as a simple pie. The Duke noticed the girl was not impressed, and asked why. To avoid the question, Eileen offered the man a bite as well. She quickly stuck the fork in Akasha's mouth. This flustered him a bit. He composed himself and then took a small bite from the fork the maid offered. Then he once again showed his charm, proving how effortlessly perfect he was. But coming to her senses, the girl wondered, what was the point of a man like him wasting his time on a nobody like her? So she put down her fork and asked him directly if she really wasn't his type. Kasha blinked, thinking he had already answered that question. The Duke just smiled smugly, thinking that she had seen through his act, and now he liked her even more. Kasha even doubted his own acting, which he had been trying so hard to perform. With a sigh, Kasha said he didn't need anything but a lover, because the Empress was pressuring him to get married. The Duke explained that the Empress was eager to find a woman who met her standards. The heroine's heart raced. This could be Empress Vienna herself. This woman was the main villain of the story, who made her own son the heir to the throne. She had originally planned to get rid of Kasha in the war, but he returned as the Grand Duke. Now the Empress wanted to find a lover for the Duke, so she could keep him under constant surveillance. The heroine wondered why the Duke was looking for a lover. Right here, Eileen knew full well that no matter how handsome Kasha was, this was extremely risky. She worried that she would attract the Empress's attention and something bad might happen to the twins. After finishing what was on his plate, the Duke said he really liked the lady's food and found her interesting. Then, in a deliberately provocative move, he licked a crumb off the lady's cheek. He also pointed out that everything here was rather bland, which made Eileen superior. By evening, the heroine was sent back to the cold palace. The lady couldn't figure out why she had been so quiet, but in the end, she said that she was now Kasha's real lover. Eileen was about to drive herself crazy, trying to forget the handsome Duke. When she returned to the cold palace, the lady noticed a group of girls waiting by the gate. Emma's expression clearly showed she was confused and didn't know what to do. As the heroine approached, she asked who these people gathered at the castle were. A lady present, clearly of higher status, said she wanted to see the princes. Eileen told her that the lady could talk to her. The noble woman sneered in displeasure and handed over a letter. She announced the reason for her visit. Lady Lehman was inviting the princes to a dinner party in All Edge. Eileen was shocked because such an important event had appeared in the novel, and the maid had completely forgotten about it. The All Edge dinner party was a special annual event hosted by Lady Lehman, a socialite and a leading figure in the Empire's catering industry. Each family would bring special drinks and delicacies made from secret recipes. In the original novel, the twins were invited to the dinner party, but a drunken noble stabbed Evan with a decorative knife. It was an accident in disguise, meant to please Empress Vienna, who despised every member of the royal family except for the heir to the throne. She deliberately invited the princes to the dinner party and disguised the incident as a fight between the twins. Eileen found it strange because this event was supposed to happen in the spring when the princes were 8 years old. She couldn't understand why the invitation had arrived 10 months early and couldn't believe the original story was changing. The heroine speculated that it might be because of her meeting with Kasha. That night, the worried protagonist watched the princes' peaceful, sleeping faces. Eileen knew that if she refused, the Empress would be informed that the plan had failed, while the nanny vowed to protect Louis and Evan at all costs. the Duke received a new report. The report contained all the information Kasha's servants could dig up on the heroine. It stated that Eileen came to the palace at the age of 12 and became a maid, harboring a fiery ambition for power. But despite this, she worked hard to uphold the dignity of the royal family, which was why the princess followed her. The servant was nervous, knowing his master's reaction could be completely unpredictable. The butler said that no matter what he thought of Eileen, she gave him the creeps. Kasha laughed, saying the girl had no idea she was disrupting his condition. The Duke said that if he feasted on her meals, he could survive for a month without the alubai fruits. But the servant didn't understand why he wouldn't just hire her as a cook instead of making her some kind of lover. Kasha explained that the nanny had enough cooking skills to make her a lover. Her cooking reminded him of a memory from the distant past, a time when his mother would cook for her only son. Everyone thought Empress Vivian was crazy. While she was alive, she never said she loved Kasha and once made him green soup for his birthday. After telling him she was sorry, Vivian stopped visiting him and insisted she never had a son. It was Eileen Harlan who reminded him of his mother's strange cooking. The man knew the lady could heal him, but Kasha asked for nothing. He just watched her try to back away from him. He didn't like that one bit, so he declared he would snatch Eileen up before she had a chance to think. The heroine left the palace administration building. She was overjoyed because it was the long-awaited payday. The lady wished every day could be this happy. As other servants whispered behind her back, she was thinking how wonderful it would be to make steak for the princess today. But when she listened closely, she heard someone planning to meet Duke Kasha. Eileen froze. Hadn't she promised to give him an answer today? The nanny realized the man had invited 2 girls in one day. This really annoyed her, so the heroine angrily crumpled the envelope. She decided to teach this jerk a lesson so he would never think of running away again. A few days passed, and Diana Enders appeared in the rose garden to meet the Duke. The lady said she was displeased that he had been so busy, but was glad to see him now. Kasha remembered that Viscount Enders was the Empress's confidant, so he wanted to send her away. But he was interrupted by the unexpected voice of a girl calling him sweetheart. It turned out a new girl had just walked into the rose garden, and no one had expected her. The heroine, with tears in her eyes, screamed that Kasha had betrayed her and rushed towards him. Then she lunged, burying her face in his chest, leaving the Duke completely bewildered. Everyone who saw this was stunned. Eileen looked up at him and asked with a trembling voice, "Is our 3-year relationship really going to end here?" She pressed on. Were all the sweet nothings he had told her just lies? The man looked the heroine over and immediately recognized the gifts he had sent her. He urged her to calm down. "The Viscount's daughter was just talking to me." Kasha pleaded, "How can I prove my words are true?" He gently caressed her cheek. "You're the only one for me." The crowd's jaws dropped in shock. Lady Jayane turned pale and fainted. The Duke took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "I'll stay here until you calm down. Forget that pumpkin-faced girl," he commanded. Hearing this and meeting his gaze, the heroine's face turned bright red. Kasha's illness forced him to step down from the throne. The emperor signed a contract to contain his madness. Once his madness subsides, he will disappear. The contract was like a dog's leash. Later, the heroine and the man headed to their prearranged meeting spot. The Duke complimented her appearance, saying that honestly, he was truly stunned. The heroine crossed her arms and, blushing, said it was all Emma's doing. After a few jokes, Kasha asked if Eileen would be his girlfriend. Even for a fake engagement, the lady agreed, but on one condition. Although it was embarrassing, she asked him to gain custody of Louis and Evan. The guardianship system was a system where a powerful family or the emperor would raise orphans until they came of age. Eileen knew she couldn't protect the children alone. They needed great power and authority to stay safe. This was exactly what the Duke possessed, and the lady knew she wouldn't get another chance like this. Kasha quickly understood that what she wanted was protection from the Empress, so he played along. But his condition was that the heroine must cook for him personally. The lady's face turned red, asking how long she would be tied down like this. The Duke said it would last until he was satisfied. She thought that maybe one day she would make terrible food and he would dump her on the spot. After weighing everything, Eileen relented and asked for a contract. After he rang a bell, the butler appeared immediately. Kasha asked him to draw up a notarized agreement. Within minutes, the servant handed them the necessary documents. It also stated that when they needed to part ways, they would just say goodbye peacefully. The condition was that if one of them found true love, they would break up. The Duke fell silent after hearing this and began to think seriously. Eileen wanted to make sure Kasha wouldn't fall in love with the heroine of this novel to protect the princess. Because in the original novel, Elsa and the hero Michael ended up together, while the Duke started a brutal war that consumed the entire continent. If things went as they did before, Eileen couldn't even imagine what would become of the princess. Noticing that Kasha was in no hurry to say anything, the lady asked if he wanted to add any conditions. Instead, the Duke sighed dramatically, signed the contract, and said he would abide by it. When they were done, they hurried outside, as everyone had a pile of important things to do. The lady extended her hand, saying she hoped they would work well together in the future. But instead of shaking her hand as expected, the Duke suddenly grabbed it and kissed it. Eileen was completely flustered, and every passerby turned their heads. Then, Kasha took a step closer and asked the lady to take care of him. That very night, in the Empress's castle, a lady-in-waiting was begging for mercy. Vienno didn't care. She just complained that the maid screamed like a beast after being hit, while beating the servant. The Empress fumed that Kasha had dared to mock her. He had earlier reprimanded her for forcing his women on the Duke. He also said that the Empress kept sending new girls when he already had a girlfriend. So the Emperor wanted to know why his wife thought she could get away with it. Talk began to circulate in the palace that the Duke's lover had just dragged the Empress through the mud. The nanny who took care of the princes was called an angel. The Empress remembered Eileen Harlan, the one who had just crushed her pride. After she calmed down, Vienno began to wonder why Kasha would get involved with that servant. As she drank her wine, she gazed out the window and recalled the former Empress. Lady Vivian remembered that the Emperor had genuinely loved Kasha's beautiful mother, but that only lasted until Vivian lost her mind. Vienno saw a golden opportunity and decided to carry out her original plan. She tried to kill Kasha and blame it on the mad Vivian, but the Empress's spell failed, and the man just collapsed. Losing the ducal title eased her guilt, but the feelings still gnawed at her. The lady couldn't understand how she was maintaining her sanity and suspected that the maid was not as simple as she seemed. Vienna also recalled that Marchioness Tubros had invited the abandoned princes to a party in Ology, which gave the Empress a new plan. She smashed a cup in fervent anticipation of her revenge. The handmaidens worried that her highness would be cut by the broken glass, but she paid it no mind, merely asking for paper and a pen, wanting to thwart that little wench with her own hands. The handmaidens then reported that Crown Prince Valentine and the seventh prince, Michael, requested an audience. The lady agreed to see them and went to the reception room, where her worried son was already waiting. As soon as the Empress entered, Valentine immediately stood up, genuinely worried about her. He had heard rumors of his mother's ill health and said he didn't believe them. Touched by her son's concern and defense, the lady decided to ask what the seventh prince was doing here. It turned out he had also come out of extreme concern for his mother. The Empress was unmoved by this and ordered him to stop talking nonsense and go help the crown prince. After Fiona gave birth to him, her looks faded and the Emperor began to distance himself from her, so she was filled with resentment towards him. Coupled with his powerlessness as a member of the royal family, the lady called him a good-for-nothing and then went to have tea with her eldest son. Valentine smirked at his younger brother, basking in his own superiority. A week had passed since the scandalous events that had high society buzzing. Emma didn't understand what the nanny was doing as she stared out the window through a strange device. The heroine explained that she was just waiting for something, constantly scanning her surroundings, and then suddenly screamed. Irene shouted that she was going out for a bit and rushed towards the Duke's carriage. She happily greeted Cassar, saying she had missed him, but her eyes were locked on the documents in his hand. She tried to snatch them several times but failed. A little annoyed, the young lady took a clumsy step and ended up falling head first onto the Duke. The heroine blushed, realizing she was lying on Cassar's chest. The man held Irene and said that if she wanted a hug, she should have just said so. The girl, not used to being approached by such a handsome man, decided to enjoy the moment until passers-by started to stop and stare. Embarrassed, the young lady tried to break free, but the Duke dangled the documents and said, "Now that we're a couple, there's no need to be shy." Noticing that Cassar was even more smug in person than in the book, the lady eagerly snatched the document. The document stated that the Duke vowed to become the guardian of Louis Richard and Evan Richard until they came of age. Seeing the Emperor's seal, the nanny shed tears of joy. The children's hard days were finally over. Finally, those lovely little ones could grow up safe and sound. Irene thanked the Duke, knowing it wasn't easy to obtain this document. Noticing her reaction, The man smiled and said, "Since you like it so much, I hope you'll listen to a request of mine." In a great mood, the lady said without thinking that she would do anything. Hearing this, Kasser announced that he wanted them to live together. The heroine initially agreed to live in the Duke's castle, but then she realized what she had just said. Kasser said he never liked it, that it had always been hard for him to watch her and the princes live in that cold castle. Noticing the gossips excitedly running off to tell others after hearing the news, the man smiled. The Duke then clarified that he was serious about his proposal, as it would be safer for the princess. The heroine agreed to consult with the princes on the condition that Kasser would attend the eulogy party with them. She knew she could use her lover as a shield to refuse the offer, but that would make it very complicated for them to enter high society before they came of age. Therefore, she decided to personally and publicly announce that Kasser would become the children's guardian. The man took this as a date invitation and suddenly closed the distance with Irene. He leaned towards her lips, then gently moved closer to her ear and said he would make time for it, but for such a favor, the heroine must repay the Duke. In a fluster, the young lady thought he was going to kiss her, and her face turned bright red as she pushed her partner away. Kasser asked if she had never kissed anyone, and she quickly waved her hands, insisting that she had kissed countless times. Looking at the amusing heroine, the man smiled and said he would wait eagerly, then got into the carriage. Later, as the nanny was walking down the hallway, a lively Louis ran towards her and jumped into her arms. The little boy proudly said that he had taken a bath. Now he was a man. He sat on the maid's lap while she asked the prince if he regretted going to a party at another castle. The heroine couldn't help but worry about what might happen there, but she knew she wanted to protect the children. There was one thing the lady was 100% sure of. Unlike the original work, things would be different there. Irene remembered something and asked Louis if he liked living here, to which he replied, "Of course. We used to live here with Mom." The prince took the girl's hand, wanting to take her somewhere and show her something. Louis led the heroine to their room and began to rummage through a dresser drawer. Then he happily took out a bottle of grape juice that his mom used to make for them. "Even though we can't drink it anymore, Evan and I have kept it." Irene was both touched and happy, realizing that if they showed her such a treasure, it meant they trusted her. Louis added that he remembered his mom's words to always live very brightly, and if they did, one day, love would return to them. The child was happy because his mom was right after all, and Irene ended up loving him. The lady realized she was wrong to see this place as a nightmare for the children. The house was filled with memories of their late mother, but Evan ruined the mood. He said their mom was wrong, leaving both Louis and the nanny completely confused. No matter how hard his brother tried, nothing would change. He grabbed Louis and snapped that the nanny wanted to send them away to a stranger. He told her to get out, or the children would rush out. However, the lady realized the Duke had overheard their conversation and completely misunderstood the situation. The nanny gave in, afraid that the children might run off somewhere outside. In the darkness, the young lady, emotional and distraught, whispered good night to the princes and slipped out. Irene changed into her nightgown and then sat before the mirror with the bottle she had received. Irene was upset. She never thought Evan would react so strongly. She had thought she could persuade them to accept the move and the guardianship agreement, but had not expected such a misunderstanding. But since the Empress herself had sent her an invitation, Kasser was the only one reliable enough to protect the princess. Feeling she had been too hasty, Irene collapsed on her bed and then, as usual, woke up in the supermarket. As soon as the girl appeared, a white, fluffy creature rushed out from a corner. The heroine was happy to see Belash and hurried over to pet it. Irene thought that since they were going to the eulogy party, they needed to bring something for the auction. The charity auction was the main event of the party. Nobles would sell food, wine, or special ornaments representing their families. In the novel, Irene had once sold the princess's grape juice, which sold for a pittance and was poured out in front of her. She noticed that all the desserts here were trash, and her chocolate would surely take first place. But most of the guests were the Empress's people. Just as the heroine was deep in thought, Belash suddenly broke free from her hands. It then bolted in a certain direction, making her a little worried. The young lady followed. Her furry companion never did things on a whim. When Irene saw where Belash had led her, she beamed, scolding herself for not thinking of it first. Overjoyed, she began to dote on her beloved puppy again. The young lady decided to take this very item to the auction and would bring something for the children tomorrow. After saying goodbye to Belash and telling him she'd see him tomorrow, Irene grabbed what she wanted and returned to her own world. But as soon as she disappeared, a long-haired man stepped out from a corner, calling for the little furry creature. It immediately jumped into his arms, showing that they were clearly close. The days of preparation flew by until the opening day of the ology party finally arrived. The heroine wore a gorgeous green dress, while the princes wore blue and navy blue suits. Although the host of the banquet was the Marchioness, the party somehow ended up being held in the Empress's hall. They felt like prey thrown into enemy territory. Louis tugged on the nanny's dress and asked if he looked handsome. The little boy liked the fancy clothes, but unhappily pointed out who had sent them. Irene said the clothes weren't from her, but from the person who sent them the toys. The little boy remembered and asked if that was the heroine's boyfriend. As it turned out, Louis didn't answer his brother's question, but simply pointed to the Duke behind the girl. He was stunned by her beauty, even though he himself was clearly a handsome man. Irene couldn't believe this guy actually wore a suit, nor could she understand why she acted so strangely around him. She apologized to the princes for not telling them in advance that Cassar would be joining, but Louis didn't mind, as a party required a dance partner, and if he were a little taller, he would have gladly escorted her. The Duke called the child a pipsqueak, saying he was almost a teenager now. Once he grew up, he would marry Irene. Because that guy took it seriously, he declared that marriage was for lovers, not a nanny and the child she cared for. Louis wasn't flustered at all, saying it was nothing and that adults dating didn't necessarily mean they would get married. Cassar gently pinched the child's cheek and said, "You make false love sound like a bad thing, but that only applies to her, not to true love." Then he turned to the heroine and asked, "Am I right? People who are sincerely in love will stick together until the end." The young lady hesitated, met the Duke's deadly gaze, and had no choice but to agree. Just as the already awkward tension was thickening, Evans suddenly interjected, declaring that words are all lies. The heroine had no idea what to say, stunned by his coldness. Unlike his brother, Evans stared at the lady with complete distrust and anger. Irene wasn't sure if she should tell the children everything to clear up the misunderstanding, but if she did, she would have to admit that she knew the future. But the Duke interrupted their conversation, saying to wait and see what would happen. In the original novel, Cassar started a continental war for the heroine, and the children all died in the massacre. To protect the children and end these false relationships, she wanted to find a new lover for the Duke. They gathered together, and after their respective introductions, they walked into the hall together. The nobles were now in a panic, knowing the rumors were true. They were all talking about the princess's nanny who had seduced both Cassar and the abandoned princes. The heroine felt very uncomfortable and wanted to cover the children's ears, but her thoughts were interrupted by a man who suddenly suggested killing them. He pointed to a lady who looked like a hippo and a woman who looked like a goose, then added, "We can also take out that pig and that goat over there." Because if any of those animals dared to talk about his beloved that way, they would pay the price. As she was persuading the Duke to give up this pointless bloodshed, she felt a tug on her dress. It was Louis asking if he could play with them and his brother. It turned out there were many children at the party brought by their parents. The girl knew the twins needed friends their own age, so she asked Emma to fetch the box. The children didn't know what was in the box the nanny gave them, which contained something. The heroine explained that these were snacks and to share them with the other children. The children were a bit shy about the kindness, but Louis said he would go and share. Irene also told them to let her know immediately if anyone tried to bother them. Watching Evan constantly looking back, as if he wanted to say something, the young lady guessed someone wanted to talk to her. But her thoughts were interrupted by the announcement of the arrival of Empress Vienna. The woman wore a purple robe, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room. As soon as the Empress descended the stairs, another lady hurried towards her and curtsied. She declared that it was a great honor to host the ology party in the palace hall again. Vienna told the Marchioness Tubros that she had been eagerly awaiting this day. She also decided to say something and began to approach. As they whispered to each other, the two women's scheming expressions were clear. Irene immediately sensed their mockery and the way they were looking at her. Then, the Marchioness nonchalantly hurried over to Irene. The lady giggled and said she was grateful for the heroine's presence, as she was the center of attention now. Then she asked what wine had blown the Duke here. Seeing the girl's discomfort, the Duke pulled her closer, saying he couldn't send his fragile sweetheart to such a dangerous place alone. So he bought an invitation from Baron. To mock the maid, the Marchioness asked if she had brought any goods for the auction. But the lady didn't back down, pointing to where her gift for the event was being delivered. The item was quite large and covered with a cloth, causing the ladies to gossip. The girl knew they wanted to embarrass her, but it wouldn't work. She quickly unveiled it. Under the white cloth were several bottles of a special drink. Everyone's attention was focused on this peculiar item, as no one could figure out what it was. Irene picked up a bottle and explained that it was a traditional liquor from a country called Makul, which is surrounded by the sea on 3 sides. She also said it was made from fermented grains, which set the guests murmuring. Some disgruntled people began to doubt whether it was real liquor at all. They thought Irene had brought cheap moonshine to the auction. The Marchioness cackled, mocking that in a place where special goods symbolizing noble families were sold, one couldn't just throw in something untested. But the heroine was not flustered and announced an on-the-spot tasting. Irene urged everyone to line up and have a taste, but all eyes were on the Empress's reaction. One of the girls declared that no one would ever want to drink such garbage liquor. That wine was the only liquor. But before they could finish, a sharp cracking sound echoed through the ballroom. It was the Duke who had smashed a statue and roared at everyone not to move. The girl was worried about the sapphire statue, but Cassar contemptuously said he would pay for it. After the guy finished posturing, he asked Irene for a glass. She shook the liquor, carefully poured a glass, and handed it to her lover. The Duke took the drink and took a few large gulps to truly savor the peculiar taste. Everyone knew Cassar was picky, so they all watched nervously. To their shock, he actually enjoyed it. Then, a green-haired girl came forward and also requested a taste of the drink. The young lady noticed the girl's unique appearance and realized she was a foreigner. Then it dawned on her. This was Princess Phrygia Leksha, the second daughter of King Lakshi, whose family owned the Magic Tower. Although she taught at the academy, she was actually the leader of Elvatoria and could get anything she wanted. She was beautiful, smart, talented, and didn't care at all what the Empress thought. The Duke needed a wife to avoid a continental war, so the lady realized she had just found the perfect candidate for him. The princess leaned in to smell the liquor and said she liked its aroma. Every noble man and woman present suddenly turned their gaze to her. But suddenly, Liksha dropped her cup and fell silent. The heroine was about to rush over to check on her when the princess covered her mouth, and the crowd immediately started to murmur. He exchanged a look with the Empress, who nodded in agreement, while the crowd screamed that Irene had poisoned the drink. He pointed at the lady and shouted that she was a murderer. This was not just a crime, but an outright diplomatic disaster. So he announced the need to arrest the heroine immediately. With a triumphant smile on her face, the Empress ordered her arrest. The girl was terrified as the guards raised their swords and began to close in. But the princess's voice cut through the chaos, talking about the gentle aftertaste that lingered on the tongue. The liquor was incredibly refreshing, with a light aroma of grain and a hint of sweetness. Liksha declared that wine couldn't even compare to it and asked the organizers if she could participate in the auction. Hearing this, the Marchioness was embarrassed, completely unaware of what was happening. Before answering, she glanced at the Empress, saw her furious face, and then said no. The princess was heartbroken that she would have to give up the divine liquor. The nobles were already scrambling to get a taste of it. The heroine was caught off guard by the craze, but she composed herself and asked everyone to form a line. Anyone who had just one sip was incredibly excited and amazed by the grain-brewed drink. So she asked if this was enough to qualify. She sighed, accepting the bitter reality that the liquor would be put up for auction. The Marchioness quickly chased after the Empress to smooth things over. The entire hall was still buzzing about the incredible aroma of the liquor. Just then, Gianna Enders approached her. It was the one who had fainted in the rose garden. She warned Irene that no matter how she tried, she could not surpass the Enders family's ruby wine. The lady was stunned. This was the very wine that had beaten all rivals at the auction for 4 consecutive years. Irene was curious about what it was like, as she had not yet encountered the local moonshine. When she got no reaction, Gianna became furious that Irene dared to ignore her. The heroine noticed Enders angrily pinching her own lips, so she approached and patted her on the cheek. The lady gently leaned in and warned, "If you keep this up, you'll be bleeding soon." "I'd love to try that ruby wine," Irene said. "If it's won for 4 consecutive years, it must taste amazing." Gianna, blushing like a tomato from the proximity, confirmed that the wine was top tier, just as the heroine had feared. Enders was feverish and flushed, and Kasser suddenly cornered her. The Duke explained that he was approaching his lover before she cheated on him, and taking the opportunity, Gianna slipped away. Kasser grumbled that he was sad they knew so little about each other, but the girl just smiled. "Of course we're strangers." Kasser moved closer to Irene and snapped, "Stop saying things like that. We are lovers. I've had enough." To avoid mental damage, the Duke requested comfort. Irene agreed, and they went to a private place to sort things out. Walking out onto the terrace, the heroine, grinning, said, "I have something for you, Duke." Then she took a small box and a bottle of her moonshine from her bag. The box contained a cheese and bacon potato pancake that paired perfectly with a mac gialli. It turned out the young lady had hidden the food in a magic lunchbox in Irene's room. Thanks to it, even the cheese was still good. But the Duke was a bit confused by this method of comfort. The heroine reminded him that cooking for her was part of the contract, and this dish was made especially for Kasser. She offered him a bite and then quickly poured the liquor before the salty, greasy taste faded. Then, she proposed a toast to their successful partnership. Irene tried to judge from his expression whether he liked it. He wasn't used to using chopsticks yet, but he ate it well. Kasser commented that it was delicious, crispy on the outside and soft on the inside, spicy and salty. The heroine thanked him for his feedback and mentioned that she liked receiving compliments. After another round, the Duke asked Irene if she was afraid of him. The young lady replied that of course she was, but since he was a handsome man, he couldn't be all that bad. The Duke didn't understand the connection, but watched her happy face carefully. Since they had both been drinking, the heroine suggested returning to the hall. But just as they reached the door, Kasser grabbed her wrist, stopping her from leaving. He asked why she hadn't comforted him and leaned in for a kiss, when Irene suddenly touched his forehead. Noticing this, the lady asked if he had a headache. The guy retorted, "Do I look that sick?" She was torn about whether someone who had been poisoned could drink alcohol, but she couldn't say it out loud, so she mentioned how common headaches were. Honestly, she was just worried he was hurt, and only lick could heal him. In the story, Kasser had to meet his savior at least once anyway. She also wondered if there was any other way to help the man. Their awkward silence was interrupted by Sir Michael, who asked the Duke to step outside for a moment. The Duke's aide looked at the heroine with a suspicious and flustered gaze. Looking at his face, she sensed his expression turning grim. Irene was about to go check on the children when Emma rushed toward her. Her nervous look indicated that something had happened while she was away. It turned out that the heir of the Appleton family and the princes had a conflict. A stranger's child stepped on the prince. He presented a gift, claiming the princes had no father, saying they lived alone in that cold palace with the Duke as their guardian. The protagonist ran towards the children with all her might, but she saw Evan beating the child severely. Aileen tried to calm him down, but the Appleton heir threatened to tell his father everything. At this moment, the mother of Giovanni, who was being beaten, also saw the scene, and they immediately started accusing Aileen of teaching the children to fight. She declared that the Appleton heir had wronged her princes, which made the nanny very angry, but they didn't think it was a reason to beat their child. The Empress saw an opportunity here, announced that the little princes were not at fault, and then she smiled slyly and asked the Marchioness for her opinion on the matter. The protagonist immediately became nervous, sensing grave danger. The lady claimed that the twins were too young, so whoever was closest to them was at fault. Aileen realized this was all planned, but she didn't back down. Louis and Evan are members of the royal family, and refusing to acknowledge this is an insult to the royalty. The frightened father Giovanni said it was just a children's squabble. The Empress cunningly supported the Earl's son and accused Evan of throwing a punch at him. The Appleton family's spirits lifted, feeling they had backing, and demanded due punishment. Vienna said that although Duke Vladis is the legal guardian, the nanny should bear the main responsibility. The frightened children hid tearfully behind the only person trying to protect them. The Empress admitted she was also partly responsible for entrusting the prince's upbringing to just one nanny. The Marchioness supported Her Highness and declared that the woman responsible for their upbringing should receive 30 lashes. As soon as the words were spoken, a knight appeared with a triumphant smile and a whip, obviously having been waiting for this moment. Aileen was panicked and very scared, but she couldn't walk away as the children were counting on her. The boys were very agitated and scared, sweating all over, but the protagonist remained calm and quickly ordered Emma to take the princes away. The woman hesitated, so the nanny raised her voice, demanding immediate action. Because she was the Duke's fiancée, they allowed her to keep her dress on. She climbed onto the table, preparing to endure the pain. Eileen wanted to run away right then, but she couldn't. If she ran, the twins would suffer in her place. At that moment, she thought of Kashar from the contract, who had not promised to protect her. But they had shared potato pancakes with McCall, so she prayed he would appear. Just as the knight swung the whip, a streak of red energy slashed across his arm. The whip did not fall. Instead, there was a soldier's scream and the thud of his severed hand falling to the ground. The Duke walked towards his fiancée, muttering that he didn't expect to see blood in the Empress's palace. Then, in a thunderous voice, he commanded his bride to come to him. The ecstatic protagonist threw herself into her lover's arms, crying. The Empress regained her composure, furious at such behavior in her palace. While Aileen hugged him, Kashar declared that he had punished the insect who tried to harm his person and didn't think it was a big deal. The Empress tried to point out the nanny's mistake, but the Duke said the target of the punishment was wrong. Just then, Dionysus Shirahan Richard walked in, asking what the commotion was about. All the guests hurried to greet His Majesty, and the girl realized he was the father of Kashar and the princes. The excited Empress approached her husband, saying it was a great honor for the Emperor to come to the Olga party. But Dionysus said nothing, merely repeating his question about what had happened. The Empress explained that the young princes were at a party for the first time, and a small conflict had occurred. Afterwards, Dionysus looked at his youngest sons and saw their frightened faces. He asked the hostess for details, so she bowed and said that Evan had thrown a punch over a joke made by the Earl's son. Hearing this lie, although everyone had clearly seen and heard the truth, this information would make the Emperor side with the Empress. The girl clenched her hands helplessly, knowing that even if she told the truth, it would sound like a lie. Kashar was furious and wanted to kill them all, but a man suddenly blurted out that his wife was lying. It was the very drunk Marquis Gerard, strolling leisurely through the hall. The lady was immediately terrified and shouted that he was talking nonsense. Watching him gulping down Macaulay and being so carefree, Eileen thought he was a complete madman. The protagonist overheard that while they were on the terrace, a secret auction had ended, and the Marchioness had won. When the courtiers saw the final auction bid, they were stunned. The highest priced lots were Macaulay products of Evan Richard and Louis Richard, priced at 4,900 gold coins each. The lady was furious, cursing her husband as a crazy monster. The Marquis explained that his wife had promised he could buy anything he wanted because she would be busy intimidating the nanny. The Marchioness was scared and covered his mouth tightly, making it hard for him to breathe. Dionysus decided to press Marquis Gerald, wanting to know exactly what he meant. The Empress immediately grabbed his hand, telling him not to listen to the ramblings of a drunkard. The Emperor declared he wanted to hear the Marquis's side. The Marquis bit his wife's hand to break free. The man pointed at the Earl and spat. "Your wife and the Empress conspired with those swine to whip the nanny." Such words made the entire Jeremy family nervous and panicked. The Emperor decided to issue a decree against Count Appleton and his wife for insulting the royal family. Halfway through the reading of the decree, the family's faces turned pale, growing uglier with each word. Afterwards, Dionysus continued to punish the culprits. The Lehman's wives would be imprisoned for fraud, while other charges would be heard in court. Realizing what trouble she was in, the Marchioness tearfully pleaded with the Empress. She said, "Doesn't Vina know this was all a huge misunderstanding?" But His Highness pretended not to know his friend would do such a thing. The protagonist hadn't even figured out why this was happening when Kusher suggested they leave. Then Eileen rushed to hug the princes, saying, "Let's not stay here any longer." A second later, they all piled into the carriage and went home. Not until they were far from the castle did the girl calm down and clear her head. The nanny checked if Louis was okay, and he quickly nodded in agreement because she had protected them. The girl also wanted to ask about Evan, but he didn't even turn his head. Louis asked, "Is it true that his younger brother has become their guardian?" Now Eileen realized it was her fault for not telling them sooner, but still agreed, saying she had requested it herself. The protagonist admitted she had begged for the princes to be protected. Louis, realizing they were completely helpless and the nanny had to handle everything, began to cry. Kusher said it's perfectly normal for children to be unable to do anything. Louis said he wants to protect Eileen when he grows up. Afterwards, They started to snuggle. Evan interrupted, saying even if you grow up, you can't change anything. An abandoned royal can't protect anyone. The Duke said the younger brother is much worse than the older one, which is why my girlfriend scolded him. Kasha explained that if I can win the twins' favor, they will stay with Eileen. She is their nanny, so it's strange to complain without even trying to protect her. So who is she to you? The boy clenched his small fists in anger and said, I really hate her. Now Evan was sure that the nanny had become super important to them. The child apologized. He knew the maid was just trying to protect them, but he was still angry because he felt helpless. The girl was surprised that such a young child had so much on his mind. He just couldn't open up to Eileen. While the nanny was thinking, Lewis hugged her tightly and said, She is the most important person in the world to me. The Duke sighed and asked, Do you need my protection? The children nodded firmly. The protagonist was shocked that the children had accepted Kasha. He pulled his girlfriend into his arms and said, You have 2 little knights now. That's wonderful. In his tight embrace, the girl blushed. The Duke smiled smugly. I guess I have some young rivals now. After a while, they finally returned to their palace. Before going in, Eileen stopped and said, I need to talk to the princes. The protagonist said she had received an offer to move to a much better place than here, and it's not the imperial palace. The girl clarified that it was Kashar's residence, and since he was their new guardian, it would be much safer there. Hearing that their home wouldn't disappear and they could come back any time, the children agreed to move. Lewis asked, Since we're all going to live together, can we be a family? Agreeing with him, yeah, we can. Eileen is the mom and Kashar is the dad. When she said that's not possible, the Duke is our older brother. He was distracted. He was angry. Her nerve was growing, daring to bully his woman while he was in a meeting with the emperor. Dionysus asked Kushar how he spent the anniversary of his mother's death. She committed suicide after being dethroned and imprisoned. The Duke knew the emperor always supported Vienna, so he tried to act as if he had never left Vivian. His Highness heard about Olga's party and thought since he was at the Empress's castle, he would drop by. He didn't know why Dionysus went with him, but luckily he wasn't there at the time, or he would have cut off her head. Not just a hand. He almost lost control, but held back after tasting Eileen's cooking. But he had a bad feeling that things weren't over. Kashar wondered why he had such a strong desire to touch her. She sensed it, said the princes were here, urged him into the carriage, and thanked him for everything he did today. He took her hand, kissed it, and said, This is the first time I'm living with someone. I can't wait for you to move in. Shortly after, faint cries were heard from the dungeon at night. Kashar wiped his hands, handing the Appleton case to Mikhail, while the Lehman family would have to wait as they were close to the Empress. After listening to his master, the servant said he would follow the orders. Then the Duke inquired about the progress of preparations for Eileen and the princes. When he found out everything was taken care of, he smiled smugly. He was really waiting for them, never having been so excited. A full week after the party, the young lady arrived at the Duke's castle, stunned. But let's turn back time a bit, to the morning of the move to that cold palace. Sir Michael came to pick up the princes, Lady Eileen, and Emma. The luggage had already been sent ahead, so all that was left was for them to arrive. The children had been up all night for this day. This was the first time they had left their own estate for something other than a festival, so the children were thrilled. Emma imagined the luxurious gardens of Reuben Castle, unable to believe she was actually going to live there. The protagonist remembered the rumors that it was made of crystal. As they passed through the barrier protecting the castle, Michael warned it might be a little bumpy, but not to worry. But as it turned out, the Duke's house was nothing like what they had heard. After inspecting it and being horrified, the lady concluded it was the Devil's Castle and guessed they had the wrong address. But Mikhail corrected her that they were at the right place. The nanny tearfully begged the man to say it wasn't true, but unfortunately, it was. Then it started to rain, and the protagonist thought that even the heavens were helping her. She worried about how her princes would fare in such a place, but the children had already rushed inside to take shelter from the rain. A rather frightening person greeted them, clearly exhausted with bloodshot eyes. Grabbing the children, the young lady immediately started complaining to Mikhail that there was a ghost, but he explained it was just the butler. The man, holding a candlestick, introduced himself as Baladshu, the butler of Reuben Castle. The girl looked at his pointed ears and dark skin and realized he was one of the men people from the dark realm of Varahan. This made the young lady very nervous. The world in the novel was divided into 4 parts. The Richard Empire, founded by a powerful dragon. Then the Rabinsha Holy Empire, whose power came from the Temple of Light, the Sirius 5 principalities, which coexisted in harmony with nature and elves, and Varahan, home of the men, descendants of the demon race. Kasha, possessed by Elysia, started a war by beheading the Men King, and thus he conquered the entire people and turned them into his main force. Only the strongest could become king, and that was the Duke's ultimate goal. Emma asked if the attendant was human, and Eileen clarified that he was a Min. The butler wasn't offended by the reaction. It was normal to be shocked seeing a Min for the first time. The girls started asking when that liar, specifically Kasha, would show up, but Mikhail said the master would arrive tomorrow, and then hurried away. The butler announced that they should follow him as he wanted to show them around the castle. But their guide suddenly knelt before them, startling everyone. The butler apologized, saying he wasn't feeling well, but would do his best to give them a tour. The man insisted he was fine, marveled at the nobility of the princes, and then started coughing up blood. Emma fainted at the sight of blood, but the protagonist couldn't allow herself to do the same, though she really wanted to. Lewis poked the sick man, saying he wasn't moving, which stunned the nanny. While Eileen was scolding him for poking a sick person, Evan chimed in that he agreed it was better to kill him without a trace. The girl was shocked to hear such words, but the child explained he had heard it from Kashar. As they were talking, Maine suddenly appeared behind the protagonist out of nowhere. Turning around, the young lady saw a new staff member, except it was a maid who passed right through their bodies. The woman grabbed the butler's shoulders and carried him away. The lady introduced herself as the senior maid, Ashtray, and confirmed their identities. Since the butler was in poor condition, she said she would give them the tour herself. Then, to calm the guests, she slung Emma over her shoulder and promised to take care of her. Their stroll took them through a completely dark corridor without any lights. On the way, the maid cast a spell covering every window. The children were amazed to see a mage and begged to learn magic, but Aileen was more curious why all the curtains were closed. The lady explained that magic is a matter of talent, and looking at them, the maid thought the twins should be able to learn. When they arrived, Ashitra showed them the new private rooms prepared for Lewis and Evan. They were stunned. The rooms were luxurious, and they each had their own. The protagonist was relieved that at least the children's rooms looked normal, but she wondered where her own room was. The senior maid said it would be on the 3rd floor. After dropping Miss Emma on her bed, the maid and Aileen hurried up to the 3rd floor. When they arrived, the lady realized there were only 2 rooms, and the one on the right was for her. The nanny thanked her for the tour and was about to say goodbye until she was stopped. It turned out the Duke wanted her to know that Aileen could visit his room at any time, day or night. The maid left, saying she would show the lady the castle staff and other areas tomorrow. After composing herself, the protagonist went to the princes to put them to bed. The boy insisted he could sleep alone and was very brave. A moment later, his sleepy snores echoed. The lady kissed him and said goodnight. The girl asked if Evan would also go to sleep like his brother. Eileen warned that if anything happened or if he wanted anything, we need to go to her room on the 3rd floor. The boy suddenly asked for a hug, which caught the girl off guard. Evan noticed, blushed, and quickly retracted the request, muttering that he was just going to sleep. The girl's heart melted, and she smiled, kissed the prince, and then whispered good night to him. After putting the twins to bed, the young lady wandered the castle, looking for the dining hall. Her throat was parched. Finally finding the dining hall, Eileen froze. There was already someone inside. Maine was gulping down a strange red drink. He turned around with an eerie smile, having heard Lady Harlan's voice. As soon as she saw the terrifying sight, she couldn't take it anymore and fainted. She woke up to the sound of an apology, and right in front of her was Kashar. She was sure she had fainted and thought this was just a dream. Her dreams had always been wild, but this guy's muscles were just incredible. The Duke's flawless face was smiling right at her. She giggled, blushing, and called him her crazy heartthrob. Then she pinched his cheek and called him a liar. How dare he trick them into moving here? The girl wasn't going to forgive the Duke just because he was shirtless in her dream. The butler tried to calm her down. The lady was startled by the butler Draken, who wanted the young lady to let go of his hand. Kashar, acting as if nothing had happened and with a blush on his cheeks, asked if his beauty had slept well. As soon as the young lady realized what was happening, she jumped up and greeted the Duke. He wanted to figure out what had happened, as he had asked them to prepare for the reception of his beloved. But as it turned out, instead of a proper welcome, the servants had greeted them in the men's style. The lady clarified that the garden decorations and the black skulls on the stairs were their handiwork. It was also explained that for them, black and purple are the best colors, and the water in the fountain was an herbal drink good for health. Furthermore, the animal statues popular in Verhan were custom ordered from artisans. The Duke clarified that his guests, including his beloved, are human, and this wasn't about making the palace livable. The protagonist also remembered fainting when she saw Draken, but the man clarified that the young lady had misunderstood the situation. There was no spitting of blood. He took out a bottle and explained it was a special porridge-like drink made from ground plants. The butler explained that he had become a vegetarian. Long story short, he used to eat only meat, but his diet changed after being introduced to vegetables. He added that this diet wouldn't be a problem if he were in Verhan, where there is dark energy, but here, there's a rejection reaction on top of that. The protagonist said she was really tired and wanted to go to bed soon. But Kashar took her hand, placed her on the bed, and asked, "If you're so tired, where are you going?" After all, Eileen was in her lover's bedroom. The words overwhelmed her with embarrassment and awkwardness, and she stammered. The butler hastily left them alone, and an awkward silence fell between them. As the lady sized up the Duke's perfect body, the thought of a hot night flashed through her mind. All these thoughts made the protagonist's face turn an even deeper shade of red. Panicked, Eileen insisted it was because she was tired, and not because of his hot muscles. The girl felt very embarrassed and apologized for her harsh words. Kashar said his beloved has the power to change everything to her liking. Holding his hand, the happy lady said she had no objection. As Eileen's tension finally eased, she felt a wave of weakness and fell asleep instantly. The night was calm, nothing happened, and the girl slept soundly. As soon as the protagonist woke up, she immediately jumped up, feeling a strong sense of embarrassment. She immediately started searching the room for Kashar, who had already left. After calming down, the lady decided to return to her own room as soon as possible. Thinking back to yesterday, she remembered that the Duke seemed to want to ask her something. Just as Eileen was pondering, a knock on her door startled her. Thinking it was Kashar coming in, she felt nervous about what happened yesterday. But it was Ashitra who came to her room. The headmaid said she had checked the master's room first, but didn't find the lady, so she came here. Eileen asked where the Duke was, and the maid said he was probably at the training grounds. Meanwhile, Emma was already taking care of the just-awakened princes. Louis said he slept well, only getting scared when he realized he was alone in his room. Everything was fine. Hearing that the children wanted to eat, the maid offered to take them herself. Surprisingly, the twins weren't afraid of this powerful stranger. Evan grabbed the protagonist's hand and said, "Is Ashitra a mage?" He showed great curiosity and fascination with magic. Although both twins grew up to be powerful mages, only Evan could fully control her. Emma, in low spirits, apologized for yesterday. She was really embarrassed. The nanny did her best to reassure her assistant and cheer her up. The kitchen still looked like a scene from a horror movie, so the young lady began to wonder if the food in the dining hall would be the same. To her surprise, the food was actually edible. They were served a large spread of different exquisite dishes. The head chef was from the Richard Empire, so the food was supposed to be to their liking. The food looked a bit rough, but the taste was solid. A group of servants peeked from the doorway, gushing over the twins. But they all came to the same conclusion. Louis and Evan were absolute cuties. After talking about the princes, they turned their attention to their master's girlfriend. The moment Aileen saw them, they scurried away in fear, as if they were genuinely afraid of her. The lady wondered when Kasser would come for breakfast, but Ashtart clarified that their master ate almost nothing. The heroine was stunned that the Duke barely ate. She was used to him devouring his meals like a champion. The children were very excited about the food, the variety of snacks, and everyone's kindness. But Louis pointed out that he liked Aileen the most, and that her cooking was the best. Hearing this, the lady began to feel that her visit this time was not entirely in vain. After all, Kasser ruffled Louis's hair, gave him a thumbs up for a job well done, and then skipped over to his girlfriend. The servants were busy arguing about how genuine their affection was, but she only cared that no one was sending him food. The heroine decided to ask the Duke if he intended to eat at all. The man claimed he had only come to see her, but the lady began to panic, worried that Kasser would lose his amazing muscles. Aileen cried out that this wouldn't do and asked if she could borrow the kitchen. The girl's eyes lit up. Here was a normal kitchen with no strange modifications. The headmaid introduced the Lord's girlfriend, Lady Aileen Harlan. The head chef said it was an honor to meet her and that his name was Vivito. The lady explained that they loved everything, but had come because Kasser wasn't eating. The head chef said that the master hadn't eaten anything in 3 months. After getting the necessary ingredients, the girl decided to quickly make a hearty meat dish. Soon, the dish was ready, exuding the sizzling aroma of meat and vegetables. Everyone was stunned upon seeing and smelling the delicious dish. Aileen explained that it was Korean-style grilled meat, pan-fried with sweet and savory spices. The head chef tried to identify the dish, but couldn't, though the aroma was driving them crazy. They all hoped the master would eat the dish she had so carefully prepared. The lady realized that it wasn't just the head servant. Everyone else was worried about the master. After receiving a heap of blessings, the heroine smiled at them and rushed to Kasser. The Duke was already waiting in the dining room, and the head chef had come in person to watch. As time went on, a crowd of servants gathered, all staring in shock at the scene before them. Aileen told the Duke to eat quickly, that he had to set an example for the children now. Just from his expression, it was clear that the mere sight and smell of the food had already stunned him. But he controlled his expression and then took a bite. His smile and delight were written all over his face for anyone to see. Kasser noted that his sweetheart always managed to amaze him. The Duke said that every time his tongue touched the dish, he fell in love with the flavor all over again. The children also wanted to try the heroine's new dish. Lewis was most impressed by how tender and sweet the meat was, while Evan was even more shocked by the sweet and savory combination. Kasser declared it was so delicious it was priceless. But the most shocked of all were the servants. The master had eaten every last bite. The servants began to treat her like a goddess, as they believed the future mistress had performed a miracle. They also said it was the first time the master had tasted anything, which truly surprised Aileen. The joyous atmosphere was shattered in an instant when Kasser's terrifying voice roared for everyone to stop. Now that the children had finished eating, he suggested they go play in their room. The Duke quickly left the dining room and disappeared somewhere. The girl had no idea what had happened, but the butler approached and explained what she needed to know. That evening, the heroine lay in her room, her mind racing. The heroine was heartbroken that Kasser had lost his sense of taste. The servants had explained that the master had lost his sense of taste at some point, which was why he hadn't eaten in days. But then why did he claim her food tasted wonderful and even describe what made it special? The lady tried to figure it out. She remembered the condition that she had to cook for him, and honestly, she didn't understand why the whole thing made her so sad. Just as the girl was deep in thought, she heard a knock on the door. It could have been the children or Ashtart, but the person who appeared was Kasser. The girl blushed, unable to look him in the eye, and asked if something was wrong. It turned out the Duke had come so late just to ask the lady out on a date. "Hey, I need to ask you something, taking up your precious time. Let's go down together." Aileen wondered where they were going, and Kasser explained it was the most normal place in the entire castle. The girl grumbled a bit, as she felt only her room and the twins were normal, until the man opened the door for her. What she saw was a space completely filled with moonpale flowers. The man was surprised the lady could recognize the flowers, but she explained she had only heard the name before. The heroine knew these were Vivian's favorite flowers before she lost her sanity. The entire palace was covered in moonpale flowers, and perhaps this was what was affecting Kasser. The flowers had a unique feature. The buds were visible during the day, but they bloomed at night. Aileen loved the beauty of the flowers and decided to ask if this was why he had brought her here, to show them off. The heroine wanted to ask the Duke if he truly had no sense of taste at all. She sincerely hoped he wasn't lying when he praised her cooking, but what she heard was an affirmation of his lack of taste. Disappointed, she looked away, sighed, and said they had been lying to her all along. But the Duke gently took her hand and said, "I can taste your cooking perfectly." She took this as another lie, but Kasser explained that he didn't understand why himself. He could just taste your food. To make it clear, the man decided to make an oath. He swore on his family crest. He took off his coat, turned around, and pulled down his shirt to reveal the crest. The girl was both shocked and excited because she recognized it immediately. The pattern was a true oath sealed by the emperor himself. Kasser told her about his struggle with mania and how he took poison to stay sane. The girl felt embarrassed and scared as she realized he was referring to Aberkins. This poison came from the continent, and although it helped the Duke maintain his sanity, it gradually weakened his senses over time, including the 5 basic senses that allowed them to feel things normally. Aileen knew that aru berries caused headaches, but she understood where they came from and that they would deprive one of the 5 basic senses. Kasser bowed to the lady, declaring that he was completely serious and that he felt safer by her side. The heroine couldn't help herself for a moment. The lady hugged the man, realizing how hard his life must have been, tasting only blood and rot. The lady burst into tears and promised to do her best to help him. Aileen thought that if he could taste her food, perhaps his days would be a little better in the future, even if she couldn't break the curse. With tears in her eyes, the heroine genuinely wanted to help him and make his life easier. The Duke's heart fluttered as he looked into the lady's teary eyes. With strong emotions and embarrassment, the girl picked up Kasser's clothes, using the cold air as an excuse, and said she was going back to her room. "Hey, are you confused? The lady doesn't like it when I take my clothes off." But Aileen, flustered, yelled at him, "Hurry up and put your clothes on. You'll catch a cold." Seeing the heroine standing there with a beet-red face, Kasser smiled smugly, compromised, and turned to go back with her. The girl wished the night could swallow her face, so she walked back to her room in silence. Just as the lady was about to disappear into her room and wish him good night, the Duke interjected, asking why she was going there. Aileen didn't understand. "Is there a problem? This is my room." But the man stated bluntly that they had agreed to share a bed starting today. It turned out Kasser had asked her the same thing last night, and the lady had half-heartedly agreed. The Duke admitted nervously that he knew sharing a bed in a contractual relationship might feel strange, but he also apologized, saying his mind felt clearer when Aileen was around. His reasoning broke down her resistance. She relented, but on the condition that she would only stay until he fell asleep. Kasser gazed at the sleeping heroine, feeling perplexed. She said she would leave after he fell asleep. He traced Eileen's face, wondering if she would stay forever if he never closed his eyes. When the lady woke up, her carefree night had slipped away, and gossip had already spread like wildfire through the palace. Every servant glanced her way, whispering about her. Even walking down the hallway, she noticed the maids suddenly hiding from her for some reason. Aileen grew more curious, and her eyes lit up when she finally saw the head maid. The heroine was determined to find out where the butler, Draco, was hiding. "Why is the lady looking for him?" the maid asked in return, but only received a smug smile and a cryptic, "I need to give him something." When she burst into the room where Draco was, she caught him right as he was drinking his vegetable juice. The man was gushing about how good it tasted, while Aileen just smiled. She had finally found him. Aileen leaned in with a sly smile and whispered, "I've prepared something for you." Draco blinked in surprise, but the lady just smiled smugly. She had long noticed that he liked spicy vegetarian food. The lady rummaged through her purse and took out a strange little box. Then she tossed it to him. Draco had no idea what it was, but the lady just chuckled, "Sure, vegetables are good, but they're not enough for your body. So I thought, why not switch to meat? If you like it, I'll personally teach you how to make it." The butler, grateful as ever, didn't hesitate to take a bite of the strange snack. Aileen was on pins and needles. After a moment, Draco's eyes just widened. This is insane. The best taste ever. It was the first time he had tasted something so spicy. Gratitude was one thing, but this was too precious for a humble butler like him to accept. Nevertheless, the ecstatic butler was ready to do anything for the lady. And Aileen, she just smiled smugly, a plan already forming in her mind. Then, she asked for his help in completely renovating the entire castle. The heroine explained that the princes were still just children, and it would be difficult for them to adjust to society when they returned to the imperial palace. Draco agreed after considering it and decided to clarify exactly what needed to be changed. She was glad to be on the same page as the butler, and they went to talk to Kasser together. As they came down from upstairs, the heroine asked the butler how he came to be at Richard's. Aileen complained that even though they were in this relationship, she knew almost nothing about Kasser. The man smiled and said that the Mayans had been serving the Duke long before this palace was built. The lady guessed they knew each other before her sweetheart got this position and deduced they had met during the war. Draco confirmed the lady's suspicions and explained that they had been mercenaries for the allied nations. Leo Van was one of Ladis's allies, not far from Varahan. That was where they first met, but as enemies. But seeing Kasser's ruthlessness and the raw power he possessed, the Mayans dared not fight him. Draco said they were overwhelmed by the Lord's power and chose to follow him. It wasn't just the Mayans. Everyone who served in the palace had been pardoned and had defected during the war. She realized this all happened when her young sweetheart was still a deposed prince fighting in a war. The heroine's heart sank when she realized Kasser wasn't ready to be the king of the Mayans. Hearing a knock, the Lord permitted them to enter. The Duke greeted the lady with a smug smile, noting that she had slept so soundly she had completely forgotten about him. Just as the girl was admiring the dazzling morning view, the man approached and asked what they had come to see him about. Aileen, somewhat flustered, reminded them of what Cassar had said. He had claimed she could change the decor as she pleased. The Duke admitted it was his fault and said they could go ahead without worrying about the cost. The heroine also requested permission to find an interior designer herself and oversee everything. This was all to bring Princess Frizio here, so she needed to personally meet the head of Elvatoria. Despite her personality being completely different from Cassar's, she was the best candidate for his girlfriend. She wanted to find him a girlfriend before he fell in love with Elsie to prevent the outbreak of a continental war. But at that moment, the girl felt a strange sensation, as if something was stopping her. The Duke became curious as to how the lady intended to find that person, and she replied that she would go to Guild Street. The man offered to go with her on a date, but Aileen refused, saying she wanted to handle it herself, with at most one person accompanying her. These words unsettled Cassar, and after a moment's thought, he reached into a cabinet. Then he took out a beautiful, large blue necklace inlaid with gems. Looking at it, the lady was amazed, but she also felt she had seen it before. It turned out to be the key to the mist barrier, and Cassar explained he was giving it to her because she couldn't drag Mikhail around forever. The girl was very worried about the high price of the magic stone, so the man put it on her and told her to wear it always. The heroine was utterly shocked by the beauty and expense of the gift. Even if you added up everything Cassar had given her before, it was far cheaper than this. It had been a full 3 days since the Duke had given her the stone. He brought the lady to the training grounds, saying there was something that needed to be settled before she left. The soldiers training on the field almost immediately noticed the noble woman standing nearby. Then 3 soldiers with blood on them walked over, which scared her a little. The soldiers said they had great respect for the lady, as she must be tough to have won the nobleman's favor. Cassar ignored all the drama and asked the lady to choose an escort for her trip. The giants immediately got excited and started begging for the position. Since the main characters wanted to fight her, she began to wonder if they were here to protect her or take her down. Moreover, she didn't like how ostentatious these soldiers were and began to look for someone else. As the heroine scanned the training grounds, she was stunned. She hadn't expected to see Ludwin here, which confused her. This man was a famous spiritual swordsman in the novel, possessing great power. During Elsie's kidnapping, it was this man who betrayed Cassar and joined Mikhail's side. The man stood out because he was a half-elf who could talk to spirits. Althea taught him how to use his powers, and he began to respect her deeply, but he never mustered the courage to confess. Just as Aileen was frozen, Cassar decided to ask if she had chosen a knight to accompany her. The girl felt very embarrassed, realizing how strange she must look right now, so she quickly pointed to Ludwin. The other knights were furious. They couldn't believe a slacker like him could protect her. The heroine explained that if she rode in a carriage with any of them, it would surely fall apart. Aileen also said that Ludwin was a knight, and as long as he had a sword, he could protect her well. Ludwin stared at Aileen in astonishment, his mouth agape, without him even realizing it. Cassar calmly asked if he could entrust his lover's safety to Ludwin. Ludwin immediately dropped to one knee and declared that if he got the job, he would protect her with his life. Watching the Duke test his knight made the lady uneasy. This all seemed more like a war mobilization than a simple trip into town. The heroine approached the man and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sir Ludwin." Just as the lady was excited to have such a talented person with her, Cassar warned her of the risk of betrayal and what that meant. Before leaving the next morning, the twins appeared, begging to go with Aileen. But the lady refused, saying they could go together next time, as she had other plans for now. The heroine thanked the children for their understanding and promised to make them some gifts. Just then, Cassar snuck up behind her unexpectedly, hugged her gently, and asked if he could get a gift too. Gazing at her boyfriend's dazzling face, the lady wondered why he was touching her more and more often. It had started right after they saw the moon-pale flowers, but the girl still couldn't get used to it. Aileen promised to make dinner when she returned, and then Cassar leaned into her ear and asked if she was sure she wouldn't be back before dark. The heroine turned beet red from his whisper, but before she could react, the man suddenly kissed her. As a result, the girl became disconnected from reality, imagining herself married to him. She also imagined a future where they had 2 children and Kasser was happily playing with them. These thoughts lingered with the lady for a long time, worrying the knight. The lady realized she had been so lost in thought about the Duke that she hadn't even noticed when she had gotten into the carriage. She felt it was starting to sound like an illness, but she didn't understand why Kasser had kissed her on the cheek. These thoughts overwhelmed her, and her face turned bright red with shame. To reassure the knight and get the carriage moving, the lady said she just missed her boyfriend very much. After that, an awkward silence fell between them. The heroine felt very awkward, as this was the first time she had been alone with someone other than Kasser and the twins. Looking at the knight, Eileen thought that if the Duke was a beastly man, then this man was more of a melancholic, pretty boy. On second thought, the girl noted that her sweetheart was more manly, and then chided herself for thinking about him too much. The knight became curious as to why Lady Harlan had chosen him. Aileen explained that although the man wasn't the strongest knight, the others were just too burly. She also pointed out that just one visit to the Duke's training grounds was enough to realize he was a worthy knight. She smiled and declared that she didn't think he was any less of a knight than the others. Upon reaching their destination, the heroine decided to ask Sir Ludwin if he could make her a promise. The man didn't hesitate, ready to obey her command immediately. Aileen asked him not to tell Kasser where they had gone today, since he wasn't her subordinate. The lady doubted if he would agree to her request, but the lady's worries were for naught. After getting his consent, the heroine hurried out of the carriage. Before them appeared an extremely lively guild street with beautiful, tall buildings. Aileen scanned the area, looking for a suitable guild, and remembered that if you entered the alleys, you could find people engaged in dangerous trades. Knight Ludwin wanted to take out a map to know exactly where to go, but the heroine screamed and grabbed his hand to stop him. The lady knew that if they studied a map or looked around for too long, people would realize they weren't locals. Without explaining and without letting go of the knight's hand, Harlan ran off in a random direction. Eventually, they stumbled upon the Elven Oak Barrel, the best pub in Elvatoria. The lady asked the man to cover her face with his cloak, and as she tried to go inside, he asked if she really wanted to enter a pub. The heroine immediately retorted, "No, it's not what you think. You'll understand once we're inside." Seeing the knight's flushed face, the girl teased, "Are you okay? Is it too hot?" The knight broke free from Lady Harlan's grasp and muttered, "I'm fine, just a little sleepy." After wrapping themselves in their cloaks, they went straight to the bartender. The bartender, without a hint of a smile, just grumbled, "What'll it be?" Then Aileen straightened up and said in a steady voice, "I like a green caterpillar with mushrooms." The lady remembered from a novel that when Elsa fled from Kasser, she hid in a temple, but they tried to lock her up there too. So she revealed a secret to the guild district, which had good relations with Elvatoria. Aileen was glad she remembered the password to get into Frizzy's office. To avoid any pitfalls, you had to be either a guard or a builder. They walked until a locked door blocked their path, but the man stopped before reaching it. He turned and asked, "Who are these new guests sponsored by?" The heroine became very agitated because she had no idea what this was about. This was all because the book mentioned nothing but the password. The lady wondered why the man was standing right next to the axe hanging on the wall, yet still mentioned the representative of Duke Vladis. The angry bartender grabbed a weapon and swung it at them, shouting. Knight Ludwig drew his sword and rushed in front of his lady. A sudden burst of green magic interrupted their fight, bringing the brawl to a halt and drawing everyone's attention. A smiling princess in a gorgeous red dress came into view. The soldiers had no idea what was happening, while their female companions whispered excitedly on the side. The princess explained that she had sent her many letters and had heard that Aline was moving into the Duke's castle. But entering the Duke's castle was no easy feat, as it was protected by a powerful barrier. She thanked Robert for bringing her the long-awaited guest. In the blink of an eye, they found themselves in a luxurious and spacious room, seated at a table. The protagonist was unsettled by her companion's starstruck expressions of adoration, but the princess remained curious as to how Aileen had discovered the passage. The girl also noticed that Aileen wasn't surprised that she was the one in charge here, which brought a sly look to her face. The protagonist declared it was a secret and that she had special channels for inside information. Remembering that the princess had been looking for her, she asked if it was related to her auction item. Frigga smiled smugly and asked the lady if she knew that her liquor had been bought for the highest price in history. As the head of the organization, she nodded, expressing her desire for exclusive sales rights to the product. The girl blushed, realizing that the Elvet brand whiskey would be sold out and bring in huge profits. Aileen explained that the supply would be limited, and Frigga was thrilled to hear it, as the less of a product there is, the higher its value. The princess also asked if there were any special preferences for how the product should be sold. After a pause, the protagonist requested to open a standalone store that would only sell high-end liquor. Frigga asked if they could also expect a supply of those packaged, black, round pastries. The princess said she had found the last one and decided to try the chocolate pie. She was shocked by its sweetness and curious about the white filling in the middle. Aileen blushed in embarrassment and said it was marshmallow, which made Frigga ecstatic. She jumped up excitedly and asked the young lady where she had gotten such a magical recipe. So the princess said she would be happy to adjust the recipe according to the protagonist's wishes. Although she wasn't the originator of this, she still knew she needed the money. In about a year, Lewis and Evan's magic would awaken, but they wouldn't be able to control the surging power and would have to flee. Only the magic tower could stabilize that kind of magic. But that was basically like sending a toddler to graduate school. So Aileen decided to build something similar to the magic tower in the duchy and find a mentor for the twins, neither of which would be cheap. She knew the tower was basically a giant magic stone, and she didn't want to put everything on Khazar's shoulders. Despite this, the protagonist felt an inescapable, strange, and persistent anxiety. To kick things off, Frigga decided to sign a contract with her. The princess wrote the contract with magic right in front of her, which stunned Aileen. Watching the girl's sheer confidence somehow made the protagonist feel physically unwell. After calming down, she said she had 2 requests, one of which was about hiring an interior designer. Frigga offered to handle it herself. The second request was about her lover's memories. She had doubts about their feelings, so she decided to put that request on hold for now. The princess admitted she was greedy, but wouldn't force her to accept the deal. As a friendly gesture, she promised to send a gift. It turned out to be a special crystal magic orb for communication. Before leaving, the protagonist asked for help finding a certain book, and then she headed for the exit. The lady knew this area became very dangerous at night, so she decided to go home as soon as possible. The knight was leading her through an alley when she suddenly asked him to stop. She took out the book, declaring it was a gift and also a bribe to keep her secret. The protagonist held up the strange-looking book and said it contained instructions for summoning spirits, but Ludwig just turned his head and said it had nothing to do with him. Summoning spirits was something only elves and special races in the 5 kingdoms could do. His mother had abandoned him back then because he was inept at spirit summoning magic, knowing that the person in the story was still trying to figure out how to use it. The girl said she believed in him and could feel the powerful energy in him. Seeing the knight actually accept the gift, Aileen felt a bit flustered but smiled. But just as the protagonist was lost in thought, the knight suddenly rushed over and shielded her from behind. The lady was bewildered by what had just happened and the sudden physical contact. It wasn't until a strange voice was heard that she understood what was happening. A large group of bandits was heading towards them, ready to rob them of everything they had. The protagonist's blood ran cold with fear, while Ludwig was already on high alert. A moment later, Aileen realized that people had emerged from behind them, surrounding the group. She realized there were too many enemies. Taking shortcuts always led to trouble. The impatient bandits launched their attack, and the knight ordered her to stay close to him. The guy was too focused on the enemies in front to realize that a burly man had quietly approached them. He saw her shiny necklace and immediately lunged at the protagonist, wielding his sword. But just then, the magic stone exploded, emitting a dazzling white light that stopped the attack in midair and completely shattered the sword. Amidst fear and tears, the lady suddenly felt Khazar's familiar warmth and heard his voice. "I told you it was dangerous outside." She thought she was imagining Khazar again until she realized he was really there. The protagonist gazed at the Duke, her heart racing, and finally admitted to herself that she had fallen for him. After a while, they finally returned to the castle, where everyone had been waiting for a long time. Lady Aileen apologized to the children for the incident, and Lewis immediately barraged her with questions about the gifts and how crazy the outside world was. Aileen froze. She had completely forgotten about the gifts. The twins thought she was sick, and Khazar covered for her by explaining about the attack. The Duke held her tightly and assured the children there was no need to worry, that she was safe because he had saved her. The protagonist felt extremely embarrassed and admitted to Lewis and Evan that she had forgotten their gifts. The children insisted there was nothing to worry about, as her safety was the best gift they could receive. The younger brother was a bit dejected because he really wanted to protect her with his own strength, so he thought he should learn swordsmanship. But the girl asked, "What about learning magic?" Lewis became interested in the idea, and the lady explained that they would both learn with Aileen and try to find a good teacher. Watching this, Khazar said they would also need other tutors to teach the little princes all the subjects they needed to know. The children were a bit spoiled and thought magic was enough, but the Duke explained that they couldn't become gentlemen without learning these things. The brothers said good night to each other before returning to their rooms. The protagonist and Khazar were walking alone in the hallway, and she couldn't help but steal glances at him. The guy noticed and asked what she was thinking, but the lady flusteredly remembered the dinner she had promised. But it was too late now. The Duke declared that if Aileen really wanted to do something for him, she could start by stepping into his room. When Khazar lay on her lap, his body glowing intensely, the protagonist's heart could barely take it. Her lover noticed she wasn't looking at him, and the lady said it was because the expensive necklace was broken. But the Duke explained that there was no need to worry, as it was a one-time use item. He had added another spell to the barrier, so that magic stone had become useless. The lady remembered this necklace was identical to the one Elsa wore. In the original story, after Elsa ran away from Khazar, Michael gave her this necklace to ensure he wouldn't lose her. She also remembered the magic sealed within the necklace. In a moment of crisis, it would summon the person its owner most wanted to see. Before the original story began, it belonged to Khazar, and the lady had destroyed such a precious item. The guy sighed and said that if she felt that guilty, she might as well hug him, which would help ease his headache. Gazing at the Duke's flawless face, the protagonist's heart was about to leap out of her chest. Michael and Ludwig weren't bad-looking, but Eileen's heart wouldn't race for them like this. The next second, they were already lying face to face. The protagonist was completely flustered, wondering if the man before her was asleep. The girl was shocked that he could sleep so peacefully beside her. Aileen felt like only her heart was pounding, and she blamed it on not being a princess. But even with the Duke so close, she was the one who had the chance to seduce him. It suddenly occurred to her, since she could love him, why look for someone else? She immediately perked up. The protagonist, dressed in a beautiful gown, was scribbling notes on a piece of paper. The servants peeking from the shadows were stunned by her beauty. Aileen was feeling stressed because she always felt she was much worse off than she actually was. When the protagonist received notice of a visitor, she rushed out to greet them. She was relieved because she hadn't mentioned Khazar then and was sure they would never cross paths unless it was through her. What the lady saw was not the interior designer she was expecting, but a princess. It turned out that Lady Frigija had an interest in interior design. She produced a stack of certificates to prove her qualifications. The protagonist hoped her friend wasn't here to curry favor with the Duke. The princess scanned the room and immediately realized everything was done in the style of the main building, and she smiled, requesting to personally take charge of the project. Frigija decided to go see Khazar. The protagonist was embarrassed by this sudden request, and as if the universe were playing a trick on her, the Duke walked over to check on the visitor. Khazar leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, clearly annoyed. The princess curtsied to the Duke and said, "Long time no see." He walked over, pulled his lover to his side, and asked Frigija why she was here. The protagonist didn't understand and caught a strange sigh. Aileen immediately became very dejected as she began to think the princess was his first love. Frigija asked the Duke if he had already paid for all future expenses. Learning that he had already paid, they went into a separate room together under the pretext of discussing the payment. Watching them, the young lady found herself thinking they were a cute pair and looked like a couple. The protagonist felt upset, remembering that she had actually wanted to set them up. After their talk, Frigija said they had agreed to proceed as Aileen wished, without worrying about the money. Just as the protagonist was doubting whether they had really only been talking about money, a child's laughter came from the hallway. It was the twins, who were apparently holding swords, having just finished a game of knights. Lewis introduced himself to the guest and quickly introduced his grumpy little brother. The lady smiled, calling them cute, and introduced herself as Frigija. The protagonist noticed her friend was gentle with the children, which convinced her she was the perfect candidate to be the Duke's lover. After chatting a bit more, the little princes dashed down the hallway to play. Watching them, Frigija said they were definitely members of the Richard royal family. She also mentioned that she could feel a huge magical energy from them, which could be amazing but also dangerous. Hearing this, Aileen immediately decided to ask if she could introduce someone who could train them in magic. Frigija explained that she would love to handle it herself, but she just didn't have the time. The lady was frustrated and asked if someone else could be sent. Frigija replied that it wasn't necessary, as there was already an outstanding mage here. Aileen guessed she was referring to Michael's aide-de-camp, and the other person confirmed it. The princess then decided to share his nickname at the Magic Tower. Everyone called him the Gray Psycho. Frigija laughed and said it was because his lab was completely gray. But the problem was, one day it exploded and the entire Magic Tower turned gray. Everyone was confused about what to do and embarrassed by the sight, but Michael was the only one who looked at the new color and said it looked good. After that, the guy paid for the cleanup of the Magic Tower and was then exiled. As if on cue, Michael approached from behind them. At that moment, he was curious about what the ladies were so excited about. The aide-de-camp was also curious as to why Frigija was here. Her friend said that even though she didn't like him, they could safely ask him for help. Before the protagonist could react, Frigija had already rushed off to get a closer look. Looking at the aide-de-camp, the protagonist hesitated to ask him. Aileen gathered her thoughts and decided to ask for a moment of their time anyway. Noticing his gaze lingering on Frigija's back, the protagonist asked if he liked the princess. The guy blushed, turned away, and wondered why she was asking him that. The protagonist clarified that she had seen the loving look in his eyes. After that, Michael became even more flustered and somewhat embarrassed by the lady. Aileen mentioned their conversation with the princess, and the aide-de-camp corrected her, saying it wasn't about the tower, but about Frigija. He also added that the image of Frigija standing against the gray background had left a deep impression on him. He still planned to leave the tower soon to finish that gift. The protagonist immediately guessed what he meant, the pair of gray earrings. Especially in the latter half of the original novel, Frigija fought alongside Elsa as an archmage. When the earrings shattered, Khazar almost killed her. The earrings could only block one attack. Realizing that Michael had made them, the girl couldn't understand why he hadn't confessed his feelings and just watched her die. The aide-de-camp explained that he initially thought the lady was just another fraud claiming to be able to cure his master's madness. But as time went on, he realized that wasn't true. Thus, the girl finally understood why Michael had been so cold to her. The guy bowed to her, offering a belated apology. In such a casual conversation, Aileen felt it was a good opportunity to ask about the prince's training. After considering, the guy agreed to help, feeling like a jerk and that he owed her one. He apologized for getting Lady Frigija involved as well. Realizing the girl was clueless, Michael held back the sarcastic remark he wanted to save for later. They slipped into the office, where the noise was deafening, and crouched down to eavesdrop. It turned out to be an argument between the Duke and the princess. Apparently, their bickering never stopped, and both were too stubborn to back down. Watching the royal member argue with the archmage made his blood pressure spike. Michael explained that they had been fighting for years, sharing the same business interests, and never compromising. The Duke finally exploded, blaming himself for bringing her here to tease her. Aileen countered that she had no idea and it wasn't his fault. The princess clung to her friend, begging her to dump Khazar, completely baffled as to how she put up with it. The guy grumbled that they should kick the guest out. The princess cut him off, saying she was here as Eileen's guest. Frigija bluntly asked her friend how she could date someone with such negative energy. Noticing the Duke's strange quirks, but Lady Aileen blinked, caught off guard. The princess sensed her friend might be in danger, so she offered to help the protagonist. After a moment of thought, all she could say was that she liked Khazar. After that sentence, a heavy and awkward silence fell over the room. Aileen froze in shock. She had planned to tell him in a more romantic setting while he was grilling steak. The girl was sure she had messed up until her boyfriend rushed over, eager to know when she had started to like him. Blushing and her heart pounding, she looked away, not knowing how to answer. Frigija realized they hadn't even started dating yet. The Duke used his magic to shut her up, as Aileen had just said, blushing, that she liked him. He pleaded with her to say it again, a glint in his eyes. She took his hand and repeated that she liked Khazar. The annoyed princess pulled Michael along, suggesting they go for tea, muttering that she couldn't understand how the Duke's magic could overpower a real mage. As soon as they were alone, they moved to the nearest sofa. Khazar smiled and asked why she was scrutinizing him with that look. She thought he had made the first move, but the Duke clarified that Aileen was holding the knife and had no idea what he was thinking. Khazar laughed, his voice trembling, and declared that he liked Aileen. He gently caressed her cheek, and her heart beat faster than ever before. The protagonist immediately declared that there would be no cheating. The Duke clarified that if the young lady were to betray him, the poor guy would lose all 4 limbs. Aileen froze in horror for a second and swore never to cheat. The guy returned the sentiment, saying he would be just as loyal. In a storm of emotion, he kissed his beloved passionately and gently. 3 days had passed since Frigage's arrival, and the interior renovation of the main building's estate was in full swing. She was personally on site, supervising every detail to ensure the plans were executed precisely. Even the servants pitched in to finish the renovations as quickly as possible. All the precious statues that the main building prided itself on were the first to be disposed of. But that wasn't a problem at all. The protagonist's mood was off the charts. Emma began to worry that something was definitely wrong with her mistress. Good heavens, flowers were growing out of her head. If she had wings, she thought she would fly away on the spot. The world would be perfect for her, filled with joy. Her friend's unexpected words, clearly tinged with pain, broke the illusion. The once smiling Lady Frigga now radiated only anger and indignation. Despite the princess's anger, she decided to triple the price of the interior renovation. The protagonist took out the blueprints and requested an adjustment to part of the interior concept. Aileen knew the house was built for a newlywed couple, so she thought the children would love it if they added a pond behind the house. Certain parts of Frigage's blueprints were illogical, but the protagonist quickly explained what underfloor heating was. Seizing the opportunity, the young lady got excited and asked to build a business around it. Frigga pleaded tearfully, as the Duke had taken everything from her, and this could be a solid business. Her friend grabbed the blueprints, already happy about the sealed deal, and hurried to send the request to the craftsman. Watching the sunlight illuminate their home, the girl was glad to be leaving the main building's castle. Scanning the area, the protagonist noticed the head maid walking by. Noticing no response, Aileen became alert and saw that she had a bandage wrapped around her eyes. The young lady hurried after her, trying to figure out what was going on. Stopping her and asking about it, the protagonist embarrassed Astra. After thinking, the lady realized she couldn't look at the sunlight, and the servant apologized for involving her. The protagonist decided to go and verify if anyone else in the main building had the same problem. Aileen felt embarrassed for being so excited without considering the difficulties of others, so she vowed not to let it go. The next morning, the girl hurried to find the head maid. The protagonist then announced she wanted to give her something and handed over a box. Upon opening it, Astra had no idea what the strange object before her was. Aileen explained that they were sunglasses used to protect your eyes from the sun. The protagonist was very happy that the shop had an eyewear section. The lady offered to let her try them on. Astra complied and was amazed. The protagonist was shocked that her eyes didn't hurt and realized she hadn't seen the sun in a long time. Aileen told her to keep the gift and said she wouldn't change the annex where the main building's residents live. Astra called the lady a benefactor, saying that the once silent castle had come to life since her arrival. She sincerely thanked Lady Heron, but paused and corrected herself, calling her the future mistress. A month after the renovations began, they finally finished all the work. Frigga was thrilled that they had completed the job so quickly. Both the west and east wings of the castle were done in the Hanno style. The lady was impressed by how perfectly the tiled roof fit and by the Sowochi statues on either side of the main entrance. The protagonist praised the craftsman who had recreated them just by looking at her keychain. The butler loved the beauty of the statues, and the young lady explained that they were meant to ward off evil spirits. Draco wanted to see them in the wild, but the young lady said they were probably as rare as dragons. They had also installed underfloor heating, but most importantly, they had built their own. The magic tower was built with the immense efforts of Mikhail and Phrygia, and the twins were the most amazed by it. Aileen said the tower was the real deal and brought their teacher over. He decided to greet the twins again, but this time as the magician Michael Evans. The children were energetic and full of anticipation for their upcoming lessons. Aileen, noticing the serious attitude of Evan and Lewis on the matter, asked them if they liked the tower. Lewis immediately cheered, "It's amazing. I'll work very hard." But Evan was clearly preoccupied, even though he said he would give it his all. Aileen knew his motivation was different. He always pushed himself to the limit. To help him relax, the young lady unexpectedly kissed his cheek. The heroine told him not to push himself too hard, as she would worry if anything happened to him. Then she kissed Lewis, and just then, Aileen was suddenly lifted into the air by her sweetheart. It turned out the Duke had heard the kisses and demanded they only do that with him. Noticing his jealous reaction, Evan proudly and smugly asked for another kiss. Aileen was flustered by this behavior, while Kashar was clearly hurt by these words. The Duke told the child that only lovers do that kind of thing, but Evan just smiled smugly and said, what could he do if she kissed him first? While peace reigned in the ducal territory, something major was happening at the Shana Temple. In the central hall, a huge statue of the goddess shone brightly. In one of the studies, 5 priests were gathered around a table. They were thrilled about the mountain of donations brought in by the Origia party. It was a lifesaver for the temple, but they were puzzled as to how such a huge sum came from an auction. The donations came from Evan and Lewis, and their nanny handled the items. The priest of the 5th temple argued for a deeper investigation into her, even floating the idea of branding her as the birth of an apostle. Another priest disagreed, worrying that with the saint's advent approaching, they might not be able to reach such a high donation amount again next year. They were heatedly discussing the continent of House, but the saintess of Shana had yet to appear. The priests were sweating with anxiety. If the saint did not appear, donations could dry up. But one priest countered smugly that thanks to the goddess's grace, a new Macaulay store, a high-end dessert shop, had opened in Nike Plaza. Every review in the papers reported on it, and they went viral like wildfire. Although the heroine didn't visit in person, she learned of its popularity through a surveillance crystal. Qualified professors recommended by Kashar began visiting the Steel Castle to train the young princes. To prevent people from being frightened by the demon-blooded, they used the magic tower in their home to make them look more human. Guests who discovered the castle was under renovation through the mist spread rumors, and Elvisto's company received a flood of new orders. All of this combined to increase the reputation of the ducal territory. The servants once again watched the future mistress, who was scribbling something down. When evening came, Aileen rushed to pick up the princes and tuck them into bed. Lewis said he did well on his history test, and that if they earned points, they could ask questions. Evan, as usual, remained quiet, unlike his older brother. Aileen asked him if he was enjoying his magic lessons. The children, noticing it wasn't bedtime yet, asked why they were being put to bed so early. To get out of the predicament, the young lady concocted a story that children in a new country all sleep early to grow taller and stronger. The heroine tried to speed up the bedtime process, her mind already on the capital street festival. Aileen was so nervous about how to ask her boyfriend out on a date that she decided to stop agonizing over it and send a traditional love letter instead. After putting on a dress and accessories, the lady was thrilled. Her date preparations were finally complete. When she stepped outside, the girl saw her sweetheart waiting for her. He was even more handsome when he smiled. When she asked if he had been waiting long, he was surprised but didn't answer, instead showing a super flustered and awkward expression, spinning around and around. The heroine had decided to invite him to meet in front of Central Park at 8 the next evening, without signing her name. Kashar explained that at first, he thought some burly man was challenging him to a duel. The lady blushed and clarified that it was an invitation for a date. The Duke was surprised, but the heroine smiled and explained that there was a night festival in the capital. He grabbed her and said he would rather take her to bed. The lady was hurt. They barely knew each other yet. She was furious. Kashar kissed her hand, saying he liked the letter because she wrote it. In the end, the heroine convinced him to go to the festival. The lady was shy but happy, and they just held hands. The Duke looked at the stalls and noticed something strange. The heroine asked what was wrong, but he pointed at the bear, saying it looked like her. Aileen got closer and saw that it was a stuffed toy. She thought it was cursed, but Kashar didn't care. He started asking how to get it. The Duke took 5 darts and had to score 100 points to win the prize. The owner, noticing his customer already had a target, said they needed to get 20 points each time, but before he could finish, Kashar, in one fluid motion, hit the bullseye with all 5 darts. He handed the bear to the heroine, explaining it was his response to her love letter. Faced with this romantic gesture, Eileen's heart began to pound. Looking at the bear up close, it looked even more terrifying, but after hearing another couple, the young lady decided she had to kiss him too. Spurred on by confidence and determination, the lady decided to follow the rules of a date. With her heart racing and in a panic, Eileen lost her balance and clumsily kissed Kashar's cheek. Just then, a drunk old man walked by with a silly grin, ruining the whole mood. Afterwards, Eileen became very flustered and started complaining about how awkward her kiss was. Kashar chuckled at her dramatic reaction, just as the fireworks started. The Duke grabbed her hand and led her away. In a corner, he accused her of lying, as she had previously said she had kissed many times. Eileen was flustered and confused as to why her boyfriend was so skilled at physical contact. But Kashar joked that maybe he was born to meet a girl who couldn't kiss at all. The Duke gently pulled her face closer, declaring that she was clumsy and needed to improve her skills. The festival continued, with the fireworks growing brighter, illuminating the night sky. Eileen was completely lost in her lover's kiss. After a while, the couple returned outside to enjoy the festival. The heroine stared at the variety of food, amazed. She remembered that the best part of any festival was the food. The lady knew Kashar couldn't taste anything, so she felt it was her chance to take the lead. Afterwards, they headed to the lake, where the girl had already prepared everything for a picnic. The Duke was shocked that she had managed to arrange everything. She smiled smugly and said, "Don't underestimate a girl's purse." The man sitting next to her was curious about the small box in her hand. Because it was magic food, it was still warm, and inside was a roasted chicken. The man was genuinely stunned by the aroma, which was completely different from the scent of blood he was used to perceiving. The Duke hurriedly grabbed a piece, eager for a taste. Eileen watched him, realizing her lover looked like a living advertisement for fried chicken. The girl then suggested a toast. After all, fried chicken and beer are the standard. They spent the night together, enjoying the charming lake view. Soon after, they had finished all the chicken and drank a lot of wine. The Duke was curious how his lover had cooked it. Eileen decided to confirm her knowledge again, asking if the mania was a curse. The lady also declared that she wanted to break the curse and get rid of the thing on Kashar's back. His sweetheart looked sadly at the sky, saying he hated that seal more than anything. Eileen realized that there was less than a year left until Elsius awakened as a saint. The Alubi fruit was only a temporary solution. Only Elsa's power could break the curse. Instead of answering directly, the man started walking towards the heroine. He declared that he knew the best way to break the curse was 10,000 kisses from Eileen. The lady was furious that they were pressuring her before she had even finished her perfect date checklist, protesting but ultimately falling for his ploy. She then became exhausted and passed out on the spot. The Duke covered the heroine with something, as he was worried about her health. Gazing at his sleeping lover, his mind was filled with thoughts. He first realized his feelings for her on that balcony at the Orgia party. When she touched his forehead, he felt a burning sensation on his back and realized she was special. But when Eileen was about to whip him, Kashar realized she was more than just a tool to him. When the heroine was in danger, the Duke wanted to destroy everyone. He had felt this way from the beginning. The Duke realized this girl could not only heal the side effects of the Alubi fruit, but could also truly interfere with the curse itself. Although he had always longed to break the curse, he was now more worried about how to keep Eileen by his side. Seeing his lover dead drunk, he smiled. He had been drinking soda water, while she had been drinking real alcohol. As the Duke held the heroine, a brilliant light burst from her chest. He immediately recognized the phenomenon, but there was only panic in his voice. After that night, time passed, and the lady had the head chef cook her favorite dishes. The chef was fascinated by the heroine's wild and creative ideas. The chef was grateful to have learned another new recipe today. After calming down, she dashed off to the princes. Eileen was impressed by their focus and calmness in class. She had worried they were getting a late start, but to her shock, they learned as quickly as professionals. Walking through the castle hall, the girl looked out the window and saw a familiar face. It was Sir Ludwine. The two hadn't seen each other in a long time. To get his attention, she called out to him from the window, but the knight didn't react as she expected and instead ran away the moment their eyes met. The girl began to wonder why Sir Ludwine was avoiding her. A second later, the knight heard the lady's voice approaching from behind him. He turned again and saw her storming towards him, eyes blazing, demanding he stop at once. He ran even faster until the lady suddenly tripped on a stone. A gust of wind pulled her up in mid-fall, setting her upright as if a breeze had reset her. The knight was sweating nervously, worried if Lady Harlan was hurt, his nerves on edge. When Aileen realized it was the wind spirit, she was thrilled in the best way possible. In the story, the knight could summon it, but it hadn't taken form yet. Under her gaze, Ludwine felt like a mess. Lady Harlan calmed down, straightened up, and confronted him about why he was running. He called himself a sinner, fell to his knees, and begged her to take his life. But the heroine snapped at him to calm down, that she would never stain her hands with blood. Before he could draw his sword, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him back. Then she blushed, warning that if he dared to draw that sword, she would get really mad. Ludwine looked away, while the knight's face grew redder by the second. Regaining her composure, Aileen shook her fist and told him he did it, that summoning the spirit was so cool. The lady pointed out that he had protected her then, and if he was truly sorry, he should continue to protect her. Seeing the falling leaves, the girl realized that autumn had just arrived. Remembering that her lover's birthday was only a week away, the young lady became super excited afterwards. Lady Harlan rushed to the capital, heading to Nike Street to pick out a gift for their first present. They decided on something practical, like a pen or a tie. Hearing this, the knight suggested a nearby accessory shop. But as luck would have it, the manager came out and rang a bell, announcing that for those without a pre-registered number, the event was over. Aileen wanted to enter a popular shop packed with people, only to find out it was her own store. The girl suggested checking out the shop that had just closed. The man noticed the approaching couple and said that all the tickets for today were sold out. The lady approached him, said she knew about the tickets, but admitted she really loved the chocolate pie. The employee immediately recognized her as the manager, but the knight had no idea what was going on. Walking into the store, they found it was a beautifully decorated and well-designed shop. On a special plate, after a full round of sales, only the bottom of the chocolate pie remained. The heroine loved how everything was arranged and that everything was top-notch. The knight confirmed again if the shop was really hers, which she immediately affirmed. However, she also said she had never been here before. After looking around contentedly and confirming everything was going well, Aileen was about to move on when she heard a familiar voice. It was Gianna Andres, the first villainess from a novel. Miss Aileen wondered why she was here. The heroine remembered winning against her at the Origia festival, so she thought Gianna might not want to see her. Miss Andres accused Lady Craft of cutting in line. She targeted Lady Craft, mocking Gianna for overreacting to a dessert. A staff member rushed over to stop the argument. She was also shocked and couldn't believe 2 tickets could look identical. After taking the tickets and checking them, the staff member was in disbelief. But Miss Aileen interjected, demanding to check the tickets herself. Kraft immediately snapped, asking why they were getting involved. Faced with that negative attitude, the heroine pulled down her hood and said she was the manager of this shop. The ladies were confused, but Aileen told them not to waste her time and to hand over the tickets. After looking at them, Harlan pointed out which one was not from her shop. Kraft swore they were the same, but it turned out the paper was printed with a special technique. When held up to the light, a unique seal would appear. To cover her tracks, the lady claimed the owner had given it to her. Aileen smiled calmly and said they could quickly verify Lady Kraft's lie with the surveillance cameras. Harlan explained that cameras were installed at the entrance for the shop's security. Kraft turned away in anger, declaring she would never set foot in here again. Aileen, seeing the woman leave with a chocolate pie, shouted, "You can walk out like that, but you're banned from my shop forever." Meanwhile, the heroine's maid was right at the entrance. She rushed in, reporting to Emma, who was still in the warehouse, that the customers were fighting. Aileen told her to sprinkle some salt here too, to clear out the bad luck. The heroine picked up a chocolate pie and handed it to Miss Andres. Miss Andres was about to let the guests leave, as she wanted to repay the favor another day. But Aileen had an idea and decided to ask for help now. Harlan then announced she was going shopping with Gianna. Looking at the accessories, Gianna realized both were very beautiful. Noticing Eileen's hesitation and excitement, Gianna guessed she was picking a gift for the Duke. Hearing that they were all beautiful, but none were perfect, Miss Andres sighed. Then she pointed and said something like that would be fine as a gift. The heroine was surprised by such an unconventional choice, cufflinks. But when she looked closer, The rubies on them sparkled, and Aileen knew instantly they would look great on her boyfriend. Gianna nodded, saying they would go well with another accessory. It turned out to be a matching, stunning brooch. Different items, same design. The heroine thanked Miss Andres for helping her choose. It wasn't hard for her. She had 3 older brothers. Thinking her business was done, Gianna turned to leave, but Aileen grabbed her wrist. Harlan asked if she liked Duke Flatus. The heroine explained she was asking because she wanted to be friends with her. Gianna immediately became wary. She was terrified of her parents. Aileen said that in their time, just being able to grow up and stay out of trouble was enough to be thankful to their parents for. The flustered Miss Andres eventually agreed to be Eileen's friend. The heroine beamed. She loved making friends. To celebrate their new friendship, they were about to go shopping when a voice came from behind. A man on a white horse appeared, his gaze cold and contemptuous. Aileen recognized him instantly by his eye color. It was Crown Prince Valentine, standing right in front of her. The resemblance to Empress Vikaina was so striking you couldn't fail to notice. Although he was a troublesome figure due to his status, they still needed to maintain appearances. The prince was surprised that the 2 ladies were friends, but Aileen quickly clarified they were not. She had just accidentally dirted Miss Andres' dress and was going to compensate her. After a brief exchange, the girls understood. Gianna asked to leave. As she left, Miss Andres warned her friend to be extra careful. Harlan knew that even a slight delay with the prince would cause rumors, so she wanted to leave as soon as possible. But he announced he was going to explain how to break Kashar's curse. Seeing her interest, the crown prince decided to change locations first. Aileen was embarrassed that he had a private room in this shop. Bloodwine was not allowed in, so he just stood guard at the door. The heroine just wanted to hear him out and leave as quickly as possible. The crown prince asked if she knew that Kashar's illness was actually a curse. Even the emperor didn't know the duke's madness came from the empress's curse. He claimed to know the solution, but wouldn't reveal it unless the young lady started dating him. He conceitedly added not to worry about his mother. If she found out Aileen was with him, the empress would forgive the girl's earlier rudeness. The crown prince confidently declared that his mother might seem hard-hearted, but she was actually soft on the inside. Realizing and understanding his foolishness and arrogance, the lady thought to herself, "This guy is insane." Valentine was not only sure she would start dating him, he even offered to apologize to the mother who tried to kill her. Even if there were other ways besides using the heroine's power, she no longer believed such nonsense. Afterwards, the lady, ready to leave, said she would refuse the offer and pretend they never had this conversation. The enraged prince blew up at the girl, yelling that she was ungrateful. Feeling a pang of pain, Aileen realized Valentine was much more vicious than he appeared. He was convinced he was right, and the refusal was only because she was talking to a damn monster. The prince couldn't understand how the heroine dared to refuse his help and wanted to punish her himself. But their confrontation was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door, much to Valentine's annoyance. Miss Andres rushed into the room. Despite the servant's attempts to stop her, Aileen realized that reinforcements had finally arrived, but she couldn't utter a word. After a quick plan, the friend declared the compensation was too low and demanded a check. Looking at the floor, the protagonist immediately recognized Gianna's bracelet. She smashed the bracelet, accusing the young lady of trying to make up for her rudeness with some trinket, and declared that Aileen was shameless and without conscience. Exactly as people said she was, Harlan got into character and asked how she could have defended Miss Andres so poorly that they just wouldn't let it go. But she insisted she was perfectly entitled to demand compensation for the other's rudeness. Seeing the conflict, the crown prince was angered by the girl's behavior in front of him. Miss Andres apologized for Eileen's outburst and vowed to take responsibility for her etiquette lessons. Upset and angry, Valentine said it was time to go and they would leave together now. The friends shot each other angry looks to maintain their act. As the prince walked away, the girls kept bickering. Just then, Aileen heard a pleasant, familiar voice. Turning around, the protagonist saw a blond man standing by a white horse. Their eyes met, and for a moment, peace settled in Eileen's chest. She couldn't believe Kashar was here. She thought her little escape was super secret. Valentine said he was sorry to have to say it, but it had been a long time since they had seen each other. The crown prince grabbed the heroine, pulling her close, and declared that Aileen was really into him. Harlan was stunned by the scoundrel's words, who had just treated her so cruelly. Kashar's eyes showed clear annoyance and anger, bordering on murderous intent. As the crown prince boasted, Duke Flatus reached for his blade. Realizing what might happen next, the lady suddenly sprang into action. She pretended to be dizzy, casually walked past the crown prince, took a strange object out of her pocket, and while Valentine wasn't looking, stuck it to his rear end. As soon as she succeeded, she hurried over to Kashar, saying that she had been outside for too long and the fresh air was making her feel unwell. Just then, a servant came over and said that the crown prince was needed by the empress. Valentine felt an unusual sense of superiority for having provoked Duke Vladis, thinking he looked incredibly handsome. But as soon as he mounted his horse, a deafening farting sound erupted from beneath him. The sound was so loud that everyone nearby was stunned, and they all turned their gazes toward him. Watching this scene, everyone felt incredibly embarrassed, and then a second, equally loud fart followed. The arrogant expression on the crown prince's face instantly vanished, and the crowd surrounding Valentine fell into a deathly silence. The crowd of onlookers grew larger. He let his guard down for a moment, and another loud fart escaped, so loud that even a small child pointed a finger at him. Aileen blushed, pretended it had nothing to do with her, and asked, "Doesn't the crown prince do glut exercises?" As soon as she said this, murmurs and foul language began to spread through the crowd. The heroine was pleased that she had taught the crown prince a lesson with a whoopee cushion. Gianna was shocked by what she saw and heard. After a moment, the chattering crowd dispersed and went about their business. Feeling a sharp gaze, the lady understood why Kashar hadn't told her about the trip to town. Kashar ignored the prank and asked, "My lady, you said cheating wasn't allowed, so why is your companion Valentine?" As punishment, Duke Vladis considered locking the lady up in shackles. This reminded her of a romance novel in which Kashar had locked Elsie in foot shackles. Afraid of the punishment, the lady explained that she had just run into him by chance while picking out a gift. The man didn't understand the need for a gift, but Aileen declared that she was preparing it for her beloved's birthday. Although Kashar hadn't celebrated his birthday since losing his title as heir, the girl declared that she couldn't miss such an important day. The heroine hoped the Duke could have a warm birthday, something he had never had. So Aileen explained that this day would be special. Kashar straightened his hair and said he would be waiting. He didn't know if she had already chosen a gift, but he wanted something especially cliché. Before giving an example, Kashar leaned into the heroine's ear and glared at a knight as if he meant business. The man immediately sensed the hostile atmosphere and quickly turned his face away. Vladis continued, saying he wanted something like, "I am your gift." Using the magic in the necklace, the two of them instantly teleported to the Duke's private bedchambers. The lady begged him to wait, saying she wasn't ready, but still kissed him back. The heroine's face was burning red as she gazed at her lover, her eyes filled with panic and embarrassment. Kashar stood before Aileen, demanding his gift in advance. Aileen loved him, so she simply stretched out her arms and gently embraced the Duke without a word. Then, she kissed the man of her dreams as if there were no tomorrow. The Duke's room was immersed in romance and love all night long. A beautiful, clear autumn morning arrived, the gentle breeze rustling the curtains. This time, the heroine did not rush to sneak out of Kashar's room. The two quietly enjoyed the sweet moment, perfectly in sync and completely relaxed. When she opened her eyes, she couldn't believe what she saw, a sculpted broad chest right in front of her. Although Lady Aileen felt flustered recalling the previous night, she knew the story had taken a complete turn. Just as Aileen was about to get up and leave the Duke, he suddenly awoke and grabbed her wrist. Lady Aileen wished him a happy birthday again and told him she had to get up to prepare something. Kashar was displeased about parting so soon, but she said they would meet in the dining hall. The chefs were already waiting for their future mistress and had all the vegetables ready. They told her that almost every dish their former mistress had taught them was already prepared. Everything was ready. Aileen was very proud, as she had previously trained them in Korean cuisine. Now, she was finally ready to plate the main dish for the birthday feast. In high spirits, she quickly finished the beef and seaweed soup. The head maid came in and said that the celebratory feast for the Lord was all set, a 12-course feast. Lady Aileen let nothing stop her from serving the meal. When Kashar saw all those novel, exotic dishes, his jaw nearly dropped. While he was still in shock, Lady Aileen wished him a happy birthday again. Staring at the exquisite dish, the man was extremely tense. He had to know what this green dish in front of him was and why it had such a strange name. Just then, a powerful earthquake shook the entire duchy. The magic tower bore the brunt of it, shaking the most violently. Aileen rushed outside and immediately went to find the twins to make sure they were safe. Louis immediately hugged his nanny, but she was already asking where Evan was. Mikhail, sweating and clearly worried, explained that the tremor came from the magic tower and the young prince was not in the palace. The tremor was caused by magic within the tower, and it seemed Evan was inside too. Kashar was terrified and rushed into the tower, trying to save the child before it was too late. Louis, with tears in his eyes, didn't hesitate to run after his brother. The heroine couldn't leave the children in such a dangerous place, so she followed them inside. Upon entering, they found the entire place covered in huge ice crystals. Aileen looked up, her heart pounding. The situation was not good. Right there, the prince was floating unconsciously, encased in ice. The moment the heroine saw him, her panic reached its peak. Kashar channeled his power and rushed toward the child, determined to rescue him. Vladdy shattered the ice just in time and caught the shivering, ice-cold Evan. Aileen immediately rushed over to check on him. Kashar told him to stay back, saying his magic is still unstable. The prince has awakened, but it's too early. Aileen was confused. In the original story, the prince was supposed to awaken a full year later, and that scene was about a magical explosion. Everything was off track. The heroine didn't understand why only Evan had awakened. Kashar explained that the child had simply manifested out of instinct. If they hadn't found him in time, he would have frozen everything. Vladdy's stabilized his condition, but they needed to keep him under observation in the tower for a few days. Louis was worried about when his brother Evan would wake up. Aileen hugged Louis and said, "We just have to wait a little longer." She said, Mikhail explained, magic is like an ocean, and the opening is just a coin-sized hole. Anyone who tries to control that power without the corresponding skill is in danger. So we need to watch him closely. Evan was trying to control it by instinct. Kashar promised to stay until the child woke up. The lady calmed down, smiled, and said, "The dish your beloved asked about is called Mia Cook." He gasped instinctively in shock. He was familiar with the dish. Aileen insisted they eat, saying, "It's birthday soup." This was the very dish Kashar remembered his mother always making for him on festive days during his childhood.